at the Idea Synthesis workshop at the Lunar and Planetary Institute. My name is Jason Kessler. I am the co-lead for the Partnership and Participatory Engagement session this morning. I am the program executive of the Asteroid Grand Challenge based in headquarters. My partner in crime, Jen Gustetic, is the program exec for prizes and challenges. And we're joined by Joe Gard as moderator, who's based here at the Johnson Space Center. To get things started, it's good to be back. We were here at the end of October and had a little hiatus. And I'm really grateful for everybody that was willing to travel back and join us in person. We have a number of folks that will be doing so virtually as well. And really look forward to a lively discussion. You can see up front now is the agenda that we've got. And the way we've got it organized, there are three sections. We'll start with Mike O'Hara from Aerojet, Bo Naz from Goddard, and Charlie Chafer. They'll all have 10 minutes each, and then we'll open it up to 15 minutes of questions for each of them. Have a 10-minute break, followed by Chris Lewicki, Scott Sevchik, David Gump, Eric Mumm. Again, open it up to 15 minutes of questions, followed by another break. Then we'll have David Gustin, Margaret Race, Jill Lepore, Tony Freeman, and Jean-Claude Piedboeuf. Again, 15 minutes of questions after their presentations. Again, a break. And then we want to open it up into a lively conversation. The idea here really is to take these ideas and pull apart how we might be able to move forward in the planning for both the mission and the Grand Challenge. I'd like to direct you to the hashtag Asteroid Partners if you're following us online, and join in with questions through that or through the Ustream live chat. To set the stage real quickly, you've probably seen this slide. It's the Venn diagram of the Asteroid Initiative. It's made up of both the Asteroid Redirect mission and the Asteroid Grand Challenge. We were really excited when the RFI got released that we were able to include this section that we're speaking about today, and that's the partnership and participatory engagement. How can we, in both the mission and the Grand Challenge, figure out ways to bring in new, fresh ideas and innovate on some concepts to help us do this better? It's obvious that the overlap is in the NEO observation and manipulation or engagement around an asteroid. But excitingly, there's opportunities for partnership and engagement both in the mission, whether it's the robotic piece or the crewed mission aspects, as well as the underpinnings of the Grand Challenge to enable us to do the work that we've already doing better and accelerate that work. So a couple of desired outcomes to set the stage for this morning. I think it's important that we get a shared understanding of how this partnership effort can really benefit both the mission and the Grand Challenge. Ultimately, again, we're really wanting to have a rich dialogue, and I'm hoping that the structure that we've set for this session today is going to enable that. And if it turns out that we're not having the discussion, I'm certainly open to changing the schedule around a bit so that we can get into the conversation that's really going to lead to the findings that both the mission and the Grand Challenge are looking for. Ultimately, the idea is to be able to feed this into the session tomorrow, the plenary session, and that can then be pulled into the mission planning moving forward. And as Jen and I continue to work on this co-created implementation plan for the Grand Challenge, this really is our first step of engaging. And then ultimately, we want to be able to find what our next steps and actions are going to be. And so we really want to have the discussion to pull out the salient points that we can then move forward with as we continue this process. Another word, Shar, I had to do it just to kind of set the tone. I know it's early for some, and those that are around the world, maybe it's really late. But just to set the context of what we were talking about here. I'm not going to read through all this, but these were the questions that we asked in the RFI. And these, for the most part, are what are going to be discussed today. Not every presenter focused on all these bullets, because that was not the requirement. But this is what we sent out in the RFI to kind of trigger the thinking. And so let us, from there, turn it over to our first speaker so that we can get started. It's going to be Michael O'Hara from Aerojet Rocketdyne talking about the initiative Unique Opportunities. That one is forward.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. I am the Director for Civil Space Propulsion. I work in Washington, D.C. in the Wash Ops office. What is participatory engagement? What does it mean to us at Aerojet Rocketdyne? Well, it's really three categories in the way we see it. It's broad and diverse participation, sustained multi-mission engagement, and doing business differently. It's kind of timely for us, as most of you might be aware. We just had an acquisition at Rocketdyne, so we're internally looking at ways to do business cheaper, more effectively, and meet the costs and customer needs as we move forward. Under the broad and diverse participation, we see participation definitely with the community, other agencies, NOAA, NASA, FAA, the commercial space, entrepreneurs, and that whole business segment that's rapidly growing. Universities, international space agencies, and industrial partners, private government, observatories and laboratories, Congress, and for this particular endeavor, the United Nations. This is a world issue, potentially with asteroids, and there is international interest. Sustained multi-mission engagement. A single mission does not result in real engagement opportunities. We cannot afford one-off programs anymore. Multiple missions on timescales consistent with the needs of the community. So we need to be able to do things and touch the community and bring them in and engage them. And of course, we have to be cost effective. Broad market applications beyond intended primary objectives. So like I said, we can't do one-offs. Whatever we do, we have to have a broader scope in mind. Get the most bang for the buck to keep these things going. Repeated broad community and public engagement through workshops, industrial conferences, industry association, X-Prize competition. It's a lot like a shape and capture if you're a BD person. A lot of the same theories, the same objectives need to apply to what we're doing here. And of course, doing business differently. Offer incentives to participate in appropriate for each community prize, IP ownership, property ownership, etc. Minimize and reduce the barriers to participation and schedule costs. You know, we need to get things going a lot quicker. It costs industry a lot of money to respond to things, and a lot of time and energy. And from the agency perspective, it would really help us if they could expedite things and not be so demanding, but yet be reactive and proactive and move things along much quicker. It will reduce the overall costs. We need to emphasize applicability of technology development paths to multiple exploration goals and non-users. So, spin-offs. I'm a former Langley guy and was involved in a lot of spin-offs in my work there. So the more bang for the buck that we can do with these programs, the more we're going to bring in people. And we need to leverage industry's investments of existing available high TRL capability to expedite the program. So if there's something in the hopper that has a reasonably high TRL, let's not go back to the drawing board. Let's use what we have. Let's take minimum resources to get it to the TRL level that we need to move things forward. But most importantly, participatory engagement requires affordable, sustained, and multi-mission opportunities for participation in diverse communities. How does Aerojet Rocketdyne approach participatory engagement? Well, we look at how we can do things differently. Affordability of contained missions with multiple player involvement. The more people we can bring in, the more congressional, advocacy we can get. The more people we touch, the more people that are on the payroll. It's a different environment, guys. We can't have one big program and minimal participation. We're going to have to share everything, and that's one thing at Aerojet Rocketdyne we're looking at doing is expanding and bringing in as much expertise and people and things we can do to help our programs be sustained. What are we doing to help others do things? Broad scope of applicability. So, whatever we do, it needs to be applicable to multiple things. It's all about bang for the buck. And if we can keep that in mind, I think we're going to have a good chance at things. And we need to focus on the industrial return. So, I have board of directors. We have stockholders. As much as I love my job, we all don't do it for free. So we have to be able to sell what we do inside as much as outside. We need to focus engagement on technology, science, and policy. We definitely need to have a STEM component, academia component, the entrepreneurial space folks, the venture capitalists, media outreach campaigns. We need to do things differently than we have been doing. And things we're doing will ultimately support going to Mars. So, the objective is to get to Mars, and we can't do it right out of the box. So we got to take step by step. So whatever we do has to build to an objective, and that objective for us, the way we see it, is ultimately getting to Mars. So what do we do once there is a program? Well, we need to promote the affordability. Okay, so right now, this is the least expensive path to exploration beyond low Earth orbit. There's no lander required. It tests several key technologies in a realistic environment that have applicability to a Mars mission. How do we use asteroids once it's in place? Well, broad exploitation is the key to reduce cost. We need to engage non-traditional entities, entrepreneurs, Google Prize for asteroids resource utilization, engage universities, CubeSat missions to asteroids, student suggestions and experiments, and engage the scientific community. It's going to be imperative that the science and human space guys work together for whatever we do and leverage each other for the most outcome. And of course, we need to keep this sold. Like any program you win, we need to work to keep it sold in this environment. And this program asserts NASA as a leader in space exploration, which we all want. Defined mission will encourage infusion of young talent, which we all need in this industry, and encourage interest in science and engineering. The technologies developed can be used for cargo transportation for human missions to Mars, and it's SLS and Orion logistics support. It gives the program something to do in the near term and keeps things moving, and enables a mission cadence that will maintain public engagement with its visibility. Approach is critical to the vision. So for us, because we're a propulsion company, we've been working with the architecture specifically. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. So we have in-space transportation, efficient movement of assets and supplies, and multiple customer applicability. Aerojet Rocketdyne's sustainability and space transportation approach for exploration. As you can see, it's cross-cutting. What we want to do, and our piece to this, can apply to DoD orbit raising, robotic missions, SLS Orion, planetary defense, satellite servicing, repositioning of assets, and situational awareness. You can contact myself, Mike O'Hara, or Joe Cassie. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Bo Naz from Goddard. Welcome.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some work that we've been doing at NASA Goddard for the last few years on satellite servicing partnerships. I'm not going to talk a lot about the satellite servicing activity because that's not why we're here, but maybe try and make some parallels to what's going on here and what we've been trying to do with servicing, and tell you about the partnership approach that we've been working towards, and then talk a little bit about just my perspective on some of the partnership opportunities that might be available for this mission. So as I said, I'm from the Satellite Servicing Capabilities Office. We've been working since 2011 on a public-private partnership to do satellite servicing in geosynchronous orbit. Okay, so there's some parallels here. There's some complete differences here. We've talked a lot about how we need to do COTS-like things and bring private industry in to make NASA missions cheaper and more sustainable. Satellite servicing is kind of a similar concept. We know there's a strong commercial market existing for satellite servicing. We know there's some technology development that still needs to happen. Our goal is to work with private industry to develop the final stages of that technology and go fly missions that are beneficial to both the government and the commercial partner. So the public-private partnership that we've put together is one where there's a lot of skin in the game from both sides. There's not a lot of government intervention in what happens on the private sector side, and there's a guarantee that the private sector has rights to their intellectual property that they've developed in this partnership. So I think those are important things. This is definitely a mission-based partnership, and unlike the asteroid industry, mining industry, it's a very mature customer base. There's a direct return on investment in the immediate future. So maybe there's not direct parallel. We'll have to talk more about that. So the approach is a cooperative research and development agreement, or CRADA, combined with a standard FAR running in parallel. And the way that works for us is we work with the partner to develop the technologies necessary to complete the mission. We do that mostly through the CRADA. We have a separate FAR that enables us to do some bartering and some exchange of money, but not a whole lot. Most of the work is done under the cooperative research agreement, and it's kind of much more like a 50-50 split of the cost of going into this. So what that does for the government is it enables us to fly missions cheaper on the government side, but it also forces industry, or enables industry, depending on how you look at it, to go off and open new markets. Okay, so I'm not going to talk a lot about CRADA. If you, I encourage you to go look at it. It's an alternative to Space Act that we found more suitable for the servicing type of activity. So, what are some areas where the government and industry can partner? Clearly, there's a lot of work in solar arrays and electric propulsion, and so here's the question. Does the government need to pay for the entire development? Does the government need to pay for the entire build cycle and test cycle? Is there some commercial entity who has something to gain financially by having a space flight proven system and selling it to maybe commercial industry or maybe the government? Is there investment that a partner could make that could help the government make this mission more affordable? Is there asteroid boulder capture mechanisms? Capture mechanisms? I don't know that there is. Are there mining tools? I don't know that there are. But certainly these are the kind of things that a partner could invest in, partner with the government and fly, and potentially at very low cost to the government, and while guaranteeing intellectual property rights for that partner through the CRADA. So the other idea, this one I think is the most obvious one, for the asteroid mining community and for the planetary defense community, we want to partner. We need to partner on how we're collecting data, or at least we could. I'd like to see us partner on how we're collecting data, and one option is a data buy. There's another option, which would be if NASA does decide that we need to fly new space telescopes, that instead of seeing NASA and private industry as competing to build a scout-type mission, we could actually work together, pool resources, do more for less, those kinds of things. So those are the kind of things that I think we could do using this approach. So here's just one example of a data buy. So if we want to go find asteroids that are coming to Earth and are low delta V return, the place we need to look is not as they're flying by Earth and not going to come back for another 100 years. It'd be nice if we could go look where they are now, which is slowly looping in. These would be the few asteroids, or the very many asteroids actually, that are in very Earth-like orbits with long synoptic periods and therefore low delta V to return to Earth. These are great candidates for ARM. They're awesome candidates for asteroid mining and that kind of activity. So just one example, maybe a partner provides a telescope and NASA provides a bus, or vice versa, and we go off and do this scouting mission together. Just something to think about. This is kind of the kind of partnership arrangement that you could do with this approach. So, in conclusion, I think clearly public-private partnerships can yield significant benefits to both parties. There's a great history of those things. The geocom industry started that way with ECHO. The COTS is a great example. Hopefully satellite servicing in the near future will be another example. Don't forget, when you're looking at partnership opportunities, it's not just SpaceX, it's not just FAR-based contracts and grants and the traditional things, but CRADA is an option too. And so if anyone wants to talk to us about this approach, come see me after. I'll give you my contact information. I'll put you in touch with the right people.
Great.
That's all.
Thank you both. Next up, we have Charlie Schaefer from Space Services Holdings. Charlie, good to see you.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. My name is Charlie Schaefer. I'm the CEO of Space Services Holdings. I was delighted to see the topic of today's discussion because I believe we do have a mission that's ongoing that is a public-private partnership and is widely focused on participation. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about it. I think it might be a model. So everybody knows about solar sails. This is really a dream come true for me and for everybody back to Galileo that NASA decided to release as part of its technology demonstration mission program, the Sunjammer mission. Solar sails this won't be the first sail mission ever flown. The Japanese Icaros spacecraft is still flying. This will be the largest mission ever flown, 1,300 meters squared. It's designed to answer all questions about sails as flight hardware that's worthy of your consideration for future missions. So Sunjammer has, as I mentioned, it's a NASA-funded solar sail mission. It's focused on technology demonstration, and within the procurement, the RFP and the award, there were infusion requirements. We'll talk mostly about those. 2014, maybe early 2015 launch, we're co-manifested on the Discover launch, and we will fly the sail to L1, where we'll calibrate some space weather sensors that have been provided by the UK Space Agency, and then move on out to a sub-L1 position about twice as far from Earth to demonstrate the value of sails, one value of which is doubling the warning time for solar storms. We also have a global participation component, which we head up. So the team is, of course, NASA providing the funding and the technical oversight. The contractors, Lagarde in Tustin, California. They've built and flown 150 inflatable and deployable missions in space, so they're not newcomers. Micro Aerospace Solutions of Melbourne, my company, and then, of course, NOAA as one of the infusion partners. So the opportunity here is that we are one of the first ever commercial rights holders to a NASA mission. How did we get it? We asked for it. In the RFP, the infusion requirement envisioned participation by commercial partners. We provided an offer that includes direct cash payments to the mission to fly some of our payload and an extensive EPO outreach effort centered around the website and in exchange for that, we now have the rights to monetize web traffic and to provide sponsorship opportunities throughout the mission. A little bit about us. We go back about 30 years plus. A gentleman named Deke Slayton, who lived not far from here and worked even closer to here, was our president then. In '82, we conducted the first privately funded launch into outer space. Since that time, we've been busy. Many of you may have heard of Celestis, the world's first public participatory space mission. We've flown a dozen flights, have 2 more scheduled, and we've put more than 1,000 people symbolically into space, which I like to say is more than any government has done. Solar sails, the accomplishments to date include the deployment of the sail, quarter size of the sail on the ground, and for those of you that know sailcraft, you'll know that it's harder to do it in 1G than it is in 0G. We have worked with NOAA over the course of 5 competitively awarded contracts to help them define a sail-based approach to a data buy for commercial space weather. And back in the early days when we were first working on solar sails, we entered into a Space Act agreement with NASA Langley at their request to share some ideas about deployable booms. So here's the core of what I'd like to speak about today. It's our business model, and it does include sort of 3 components. The first is that and this is why I think it's applicable not just to sails, but to any technology. Asteroid retrieval has all of these components. So the first thing you have to have is a real and a compelling space mission. We have a motto at our company, no cartoons, only flight. The mission can be compelling on the basis of where it's going, who's on board, or what it's doing. Any of those components can make a compelling space mission, but remember, it has to be real. The second component is make the world aware of what you're doing. You do that through earned media. Of course, our most recent Celestis flight, where we launched Scotty and Gordo Cooper and 300 other folks, attracted more than 1 billion media impressions, and our website and our webcast was an equal number of unique impressions. So getting earned media is easy for compelling space missions if you know how to do it. It's more difficult if it's a boring space mission, I'll give you that, but it is a key component of global awareness. The second is through advertising. We are a Groupon Evergreen partner. We do pay-per-click on Google. We have a broad scope of methods by which we let the world know that we're involved in a compelling space mission. The final component of the business model, which again I think is relevant for missions going forward, is pretty simple. Take money wherever it exists. So we have traditional revenues, we have U.S. government customers, we have commercial customers that buy data or buy hardware or buy demonstrations. But we also have what I call non-traditional revenues. We monetize Internet unique visitors. I was asked to give a testimony to the Senate Space Committee a few years back. I told Senator Brownback that if NASA had a shopping cart on its Mars landing web pages, they probably could have financed subsequent missions. I'm glad that they don't, because that's my business. But taking space-interested web traffic and learning how to monetize it is something we've been doing for 15 years. Sponsorship. We've done missions for 20th Century Fox, Nescafé, Barrels Writings Instruments in England, and a number of other key sponsors. And then finally, Memorial Spaceflight, certainly a non-traditional revenue stream. So in the form of solar sail commercial infusion, the first application I've already mentioned. This is the outcome of a study we did for NOAA that shows how a data purchase approach to sail-delivered space weather information is A, lower cost, B, more comprehensive, and C, provides at least double the warning time. And if you're a nuclear power plant trying to shut down during a solar storm because you're worried about the grid overheating, that extra 45 minutes matters. If you're piloting an airplane over the poles and you need to come down to a lower altitude or even land, having that extra time matters. If you're in this space station and you need to get to the Russian side of it because it's more heavily shielded, that extra time matters. So I'll skip communications. I'll talk about entertainment missions. Certainly anybody that's ever seen an America's Cup race understands the concept of logos on the sail. We've already tested the paint. We know how to do it. We know how to cover X% of sails and not reduce the propulsive reflectivity. It's just a matter of time once sails get going that you'll see the race around the moon. That actually is what Sunjammer is named for. Back in June, we announced that Sir Arthur Clarke's DNA will be part of our cosmic archive on the Sunjammer mission. And Clarke wrote Sunjammer as a story about a race around the moon. So, space weather, let's say one thing about space weather. This is a chart provided by the new director of NOAA, Dr. Catherine Sullivan, Assistant Secretary of Commerce, last year. Everybody in commercial space is seeking the hockey stick. Many people are promising the hockey stick in terms of just get started and you'll see dramatic growth in the use. Here's the hockey stick. The consumer growth in the Space Weather Prediction Center's subscription service as we become a more wired planet and dependent upon space weather information creates an obvious market. Game changer, I've described that. And so what are we doing with Sunjammer? We call it Explore, Educate, and Entertain. The exploration component is the proof of the technology. We're going to take it, fly it into deep space. Educate, we have kids, school students from Tustin, California to Zambia participating in the mission. And remember, we're 14 to 18 months out from the flight. You only heard about Curiosity, you all heard about Curiosity well in advance. The world learned about Curiosity 7 days in advance. So we're in the process of building that crescendo. I guarantee you when there are 6 HD cameras and 1 GoPro flyaway camera taking images of that fully deployed sail out in deepest space, there isn't a sports bar on the planet that's not going to have that on CNN, and people are going to see that. Finally, and that slips over into the entertainment component. We have the music of Sunjammer, we have launch events, we have any number of things planned, and we're beginning to implement them. Celestis, we're flying payload. So I'll finish up here with what my thoughts about what is relevant for today's topic. The first is that innovative partnerships can succeed. There's some hiccups along the way. I thought for certain when we were announced the winner that I was going to have a huge, I'll say it, battle at NASA dragging a Space Act agreement out of them to allow me to do the things I'd won in the procurement. Not a bit. COTS and new ways of doing things took hold. We have an agreement. We have the rights. Those rights include don't mess with our mission, which we understand all of our activities occur post the accomplishment of the NASA mission. But there was a lot of give and take in terms of what is the proper format to do that, but we can succeed. The science and technical goals of the mission came first. The infusion between NOAA and us accomplished also, and we figured out a bunch of new missions and things that we can use solar sails for. I mentioned space weather. Obviously, anybody that's been to an asteroid conference knows that sails have a role there. But again, I will say that it is not the model is not unique to solar sails. Asteroid sail missions already in planning. Public engagement, technologies, and methods evolving as almost as fast as the mission technologies. We're trying to keep up with developing apps, with developing new forms of interaction for our public. The more folks, the more eyeballs we show on this mission, the more dollars flow to us, and the more dollars that flow to the mission. So, that's me. I'm here in Houston, and happy to be a part of today's program. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. Fantastic. All right. So we've got now 15 minutes of questions. I want to throw it out first. Do we have anything that's come online, Joe?
No, not
Okay. We've got our speakers in the room. Any questions, ideas peaked from our audience members? We have mic runners. Okay. We do have. Oh, please.
So I have a question about solar sails and gravity or planetary defense. There you go. Oh. So presumably you can use a solar sail like a kite.
Absolutely. I mean, it uses the photonic pressure.
Can you start at the
Yes. Yes. Yes, you can. It's a in-space propulsion system that has a variety of applications. The sunlight is, the photonic pressure is constant, so we have to end up jibing and tacking just like you use a sailboat. But that's what we'll be demonstrating is that maneuverability. And it can be attached to, depends on the size of the sail, the thickness of the material that you use, but certainly that's an application.
Actually, I have a question on that, the solar sail too. I'm not sure when the launch is of the Sunjammer, but have you already started with your public outreach? Have you gotten a following already? Have you started to see people hitting the site and things like that?
Love that question. sunjammermission.com. And yes, we have a large number of people that are already on the mailing list. We also Facebook and tweet on a regular basis about the mission. We've done a number of media rollouts. We did a press conference in June where we announced Sir Arthur. We got another one coming up in December when we'll announce the first major consumer products marketing partner that we have. I can't do that today, but we have that as well. And so we have a series of planned events and announcements, some of which I think are pretty cool, coming to the point of the launch. To answer your question, the launch is currently on the manifest for Q4 of 2014. My guess is, having been doing this stuff for 30 years, it'll move to the right a little bit. But we are a secondary. I have a T-shirt that says being a secondary sucks. But in this case, we're a happy secondary. And so we'll be co-manifested with the Discover spacecraft that's flying for that time.
You had a photograph of a band, and you mentioned the music of Sunjammer. What would you explain more?
There's sort of two components to that. One is on our website in Q1 next year, we're going to open it up for everybody's playlists. Mine includes Come Sail Away, Here Comes the Sun, all that kind of stuff, old guy music. Others are picking other music, but we also are lining up a series of celebrities who are doing songs for the mission. They'll be part of what we call the Cosmic Archive, sort of like the Voyager mission, only in this instance, some of the performers will be performing the music for the first time in some of their concerts. I wish I could tell you more. I'm dying to tell you more because it will increase the traffic on our website. But we do plan both broad-based participation, where anybody will have people submit songs that we'll put on the Cosmic Archive as well. So broad-based public participation as well as some entertainment.
I guess this question is for Jason or Jen. We heard some different kinds of partnership ideas, different ways of engaging with NASA. From the program perspective, what are you guys more amenable to for just grand challenge type activities or ones that cross the other side into the mission? How do you guys see structuring that?
So I represent the Grand Challenge, and so I'm listening with my ears for that, number one. But number two, as the lead for this session, I'm listening for all the ideas that can then be put into the findings for the mission as well. So while I do wear the Grand Challenge hat, and Jen helps me with that hat, this is about the Asteroid initiative right now, and so it's pulling out all the best ideas that can be laid on the table and factored into planning for both.
Can these solar sails be configured in an array so that you can use the solar pressure and the Yarkovsky effect to your advantage when trying to move an asteroid?
I went to the Foreign Service School at Georgetown. I'd have to ask the engineers that question. Sorry.
I'll jump in. We've got a question from Mike Helton at HADAYANO on Twitter. His question is, has there been or is there a consideration to involve a group of philanthropists to partner with NASA to supply funds? And I'll throw that out there to our speakers. Since you've been out engaging in partnership, has discussion with philanthropists crossed your mind or actually been successful? Yes. Yeah.
From our perspective, we generally approach them as investors, not philanthropists. But a huge part of what we do is through 501c3s. We're partnered with the Conrad Foundation. We're working with other C3s around the world. And so it would be easy to try to vector interested people who are looking for that tax deductibility and into the education programs. I should also mention, if I may, that we've been working very closely with our partners at the Marshall Space Flight Center and EPO. They've been unbelievably supportive. They've asked us to do some events that they didn't have the budget for. We had the budget to do it, so that in that way we're also trying to benefit the mission, making education and public outreach opportunities happen.
Both.
I haven't personally talked with such people, but I know that there are conversations like that going on. NASA has great potential to do philanthropic things. One example would be, helping solve world hunger, for example, by using space assets to measure soil nitrogen composition and things like that. And I have certainly heard of philanthropic organizations meeting with NASA, discussing with NASA ways that we could partner to do things that those kind of organizations would be interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is actually still a response, but I've talked to a number of people who seem to have an interest in promoting the idea of education. I mean, in this country in particular, I think there's a role for philanthropy in providing educational tools for schools to embrace this whole thing.
Yeah, so one from online. The question is about engaging universities as well as foreign countries or foreign space entities who are interested in participating in that kind of thing. It's kind of generic. I'll just open that up to any of the presenters so far.
I alluded to the fact that we have two space weather instruments, magnetometers that's no bigger than this. It's an amazing machine, and a solar wind analyzer, both provided by University College and I believe it's King's College in London through the UK Space Agency. So Sunjammer is also involving foreign, non-U.S. space agencies and universities.
I think this question is for Mr. Schaefer specifically. I don't quite understand the full revenue model for your company, but can you talk a little bit about proportionally how much of it comes from government sources versus private? And on the private side, do you see that source of revenue extensible to the orders of magnitude more expensive missions where we're talking about human missions to deep space?
Taking the second part first, there are companies out there that are talking about using the same model that we're implementing for human missions. I have to say that the jury's out on that, just because we're in the very early parts of doing these types of missions. There's no question that if you look at the Olympics or you look at the World Cup or you look at any sort of high visibility activity, the dollars available to monetize the eyeballs that are on those events are quite high and at the level that permit that. Our money is mostly private. The good news is that the mission is paid for by for Sunjammer. The mission is paid for by the government. We are flowing additional dollars and activities into it, but we're not getting any government dollars out of Sunjammer. It's all risk capital involved at this point. I think that going forward, the model can really apply across any space mission as long as you deliver what people are looking for, which is a compelling experience that's handled professionally and provides a reason for people to stay on your website and click through to website users. Some of our follow-on missions, the space weather mission, for example, with NOAA, envisions that being a data buy, very much like the imagery business went from Landsat only to government data buys for imagery. And so we believe that we can make a case for lowering the cost to the government of providing that service by using the platform to serve multiple revenue streams as opposed to be dedicated only to the government mission. So I believe the model kind of can extend in all those ways. Having said that, you got to get out there and actually do it, and then we can have the discussion. So we're looking forward to a really busy year, followed by some additional implementation activities.
Hi, this question's for Bo. So in your talk, you talked about convincing commercial partners to come on and invest in what you're doing. So traditionally, NASA's the funder for activities and providing these spacecraft. So what have you found that you have to do differently or think differently as NASA to convince let's say the larger holders of the technology to invest their own money to be able to see a business case and move forward with projects like you're doing in space?
Yeah, what does NASA have to do differently to be a good partner, I think, is part of the question. I think there's two main things that come to mind. The first is NASA has to accept that private industry knows what they're doing, that they know how to build spacecraft, and that we don't need to have a lot of oversight into what they're doing. We can trust that if they have skin in the game, they're going to do the job right, and that we don't need to make something that would cost private industry $100 million, cost the government $300 million, just because we make them do more paper. So I think that's one of the things we need to back off and let industry do what it's good at. I think the second thing is much more challenging, and especially in today's climate. It's hard for the government to be a good partner when we don't have stable year-to-year programmatic funding. And so for something like Space Station and COTS, the government can be a good partner because we're committed. So certainly we need to be committed, and we need to not be subject to the whims of change in Washington. And that's much more challenging. Is your question?
Yeah, I think the other part is how much do you need to, how much effort do you have to put into understanding the business cases?
So the other question was, how much effort do you need to put into understanding the business case? I think that's a great example, a great question. I think we really, really have to understand it well, because we're making decisions now that are going to impact that business case. And in order to bring partners on, I think they need to know that we understand their business case. So in the asteroid mining example, right, we need to make sure that we understand the phases of their program, and that we're doing things now that move them forward in those phases, and not just giving them setbacks and those kind of things. So a very vague answer, I know, but I think it's very important that we understand what motivates our partner.
Yeah, I have another one for Charles. The question is, school participation, what levels? Is it high school, community college, universities?
All of the above. If you go to sunjammermission.com, you'll see about a little video of about, I think, 30 Zambian kids who are in elementary school all going, "We are going to space." We had high school and middle schoolers into the Lagarde facility to see the sail under construction, and they actually witnessed the deployment test as part of their advanced science activities. Universities will be announcing a couple of partnerships, both in technology and in non-technology components of the mission down the road. So I think, we're about trying to evangelize the mission wherever we can, and certainly a key component of it is the education side of things that we're doing. So we've got a full-time director of education that was a high school teacher in Houston and went on to run an urban debate league in Minnesota, and is now full-time working doing our blog. We have a university student at Ohio State University that runs a really cool Facebook called Space Weather Trackers, and he writes blogs for us about space weather that are targeted at students of all ages.
Okay, folks, that will conclude our questions for now. We'll have a 10-minute break. I just want to remind everybody that we're going to have discussion period at the end of all the speakers. So if you have thoughts, other things get triggered during the break, that there's going to be an opportunity to continue this conversation. So thanks to our presenters. We'll have a 10-minute break and then start up again at 5 after 9. Thank you.
As early as the 19th century, writers and artists and scientists around the world began to publish their visions of a crewed outpost in space. In 1869, author Edward Everett Hale penned The Brick Moon, a short story about a satellite built from 12 million bricks. At the turn of the 20th century, Russian scientist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky proposed ideas about human spaceflight, including an orbiting space station. In 1923, Romanian math teacher Herman Oberth published a treatise that included an orbiting refueling station for a manned trip to Mars. A few years later, in 1929, Austrian engineer Hermann Nordung wrote of a giant wheel-shaped platform that rotated to produce artificial gravity. One of Oberth's students was famed rocketeer Wernher von Braun, who in late 1945 developed a concept for a modular, wheel-like space station that would serve as a launching point for a mission to the moon. In 1952, von Braun published a widely read series of articles about space travel in Collier's magazine. In the early 1960s, as human spaceflight programs in the United States and Russia took shape, engineers and designers began to investigate a variety of space station concepts based on then-current technology. The Soviets were the first to establish an orbiting space station, Salyut 1, launched in 1971. In 1973, Skylab was assembled from unused Apollo rocket parts and launched to become America's first orbiting space station. 3 crews flew aboard Skylab for a total of 171 days on orbit, conducting a variety of scientific experiments and observations that demonstrated the value and the potential for space-based research. A temporary space station was created when an American Apollo Command Module spacecraft docked with a Russian Soyuz ship on July 17, 1975. Apollo-Soyuz was a viable example of international cooperation, the keystone and the foundation of the global partnership that would result in the construction of the International Space Station. With the launch of the first space shuttle on April 12, 1981, America resumed flying men and women into space.
We can follow our dreams to distant stars, living and working in space for peaceful economic and scientific gain.
In his 1984 State of the Union address, President Ronald Reagan announced the construction of a permanently crewed space station. 11 nations signed a formal agreement with NASA to participate in the development and construction of Space Station Freedom. In February 1986, the Soviets began construction of their modular space station, Mir. By October 1990, congressional budget changes mandated a complete redesign of the Space Station Freedom project, with an emphasis on affordability. In 1993, NASA was directed to maximize the new station's scientific capabilities and leverage Russia's considerable experience in space station operations by inviting Russian participation in the American Space Station project. The result was a global partnership of 15 countries that learned to work through differences in culture, language, politics, design, manufacturing, management, and operational styles. During Phase 1 of the Space Station program, between February 1994 and June 1998, space shuttles made 11 visits to Mir, and 7 NASA astronauts lived aboard the Russian station. The experience gained from this series of flights was invaluable and set the stage for the design, development, and construction of the greatest engineering project in the history of mankind, a state-of-the-art research laboratory orbiting our planet.
If you think an asteroid is just a rocky metallic object that orbits the sun, think again. We have much more to learn about these big rocks. Asteroids are the leftover material that didn't quite form into planets. Ceres, the largest asteroid in our solar system, may actually have seasonal polar caps like Earth, and Vesta, the brightest, may have rocks more strongly magnetized than those on Mars. Join NASA as they look at asteroids to discover clues about the very beginning of our solar system.
Hi, I'm Dwayne Johnson, the voice of Chuck the astronaut in the film Planet 51, and you're watching Emmy Award-winning programming on NASA TV.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the Partnership and Participatory Engagement session at the Ideas Synthesis Workshop here in Houston. We're lucky to have Chris Lewicki joining us through Adobe Connect, and we will be pulling him in virtually. So why don't we turn over to Chris. Real quick before we do that, hashtag Asteroid Partners to follow us online and submit your questions. And one quick thing for you, Chris, if you wouldn't mind staying on after the presenters are all finished, we'll have questions, and I know folks would likely have some for you. So if you wouldn't mind sticking around, that would be awesome. And with that,
absolutely, I can do that.
Great. And with that, I'll turn it over to you and your presentation. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. This morning, I'm going to give you some of Planetary Resources' thoughts on participatory engagement with NASA and the U.S. government and private industry in meeting the goals of NASA's Asteroid Initiative. To start with, though, I wanted to speak a little bit on why we explore. To date, we've explored for scientific interest, for meeting questions of our solar system, how it began to form. But that's really starting to transition. We've learned a great deal in the last 50 years of space exploration. And as the President said in our own U.S. National Space Policy in 2010, which is on this page, we're transitioning to a way of exploration that's ultimately more sustainable and even indefinite. And in order for us to be able to do this, we think one of the critical ways and things we need to leverage are resources. The near-Earth asteroids in the solar system really have a tremendous amount of resources that can be leveraged for this, from water to precious minerals and the structural materials that we'll need to build future structures in space. And the asteroids themselves, of course, are extremely plentiful in these resources. So over time, we've been the benefit of an exploration program thus far between NASA and other space agencies that sent a number of exploration spacecraft to small solar system bodies. The Near-Earth Asteroid Rendezvous Shoemaker mission to the first Near-Earth asteroid out to today's OSIRIS-REx. But these missions are becoming increasingly complex, increasingly expensive as a result, and unfortunately a bit less frequent. And this is something that, from a commercial standpoint, we would like to see the pace quickened in this area. And today we propose a way for a private-public partnership to enable that. So the idea is the creation of an incentive prize for the acquisition of asteroid data, a private-public partnership between the government and private industry. And this is something that's already been done before. NASA has one of these partnerships in place in the form of the Innovative Lunar Demonstrations Data, BAA. And this is underway today. 6 companies originally were selected for this. It further was down-selected to 3, and progress is underway for those teams who are competing for the Google Lunar X Prize. As it relates to asteroid data, this is something that can probably be achieved for less than the cost of a single discovery mission. We would have, maybe perhaps through the end of the decade, to return data in line with roadmaps that are in place today. And the award types would allow perhaps a half a dozen different companies to provide these types of data. So just as a notional overview, these are things that are gone through a selection process based on technical merit, business merit, and then ultimate value. And you have a detailed set of things that the businesses need to do, contract line items, and this is drawing directly on the language and the structure that has been created for the lunar ILDD program. The process starts with a solicitation and an initial small award just to set things up, and then increases through more and more productive gates. Initially, activities might be done on Earth or in proximity to Earth. Follow-on milestones might include missions that go out to the vicinity of the asteroid or perhaps fly by Earth-crossing asteroids. But ultimately, and what is most value both to private industry as well to the government, are the rendezvous missions that help reduce the risk and characterize more and more of these small bodies in the solar system. To give you one example, going into the later stage activities, we could look to the third tier of these activities. And for example, an entire rendezvous mission could be conducted for a $50 million award. This would be something that would be paid upon receipt of the data. This is not a cost plus fixed fee program, but something that would require businesses to essentially risk the mission and develop this, but in doing so would know that in providing the data, the government would be a customer for it. So these milestones at the rendezvous point could mean touching down on the surface of the asteroid, perhaps for in situ science, the identification of potential human hazards, perhaps simulating human-appropriate approach and departure trajectories, and, of course, the extended duration science that you can get where you can characterize the asteroid's mass, volume, spin state, surface morphology, and perhaps even characterize other hazards like dust, or if there are moons present in the asteroid system. This is something that Planetary Resources is prepared to support, starting with our own internal activities of launching our core technology next year. And in the next several years, we have an increasingly more capable set of demonstrations, adding in those capabilities necessary to go into deep space, which include propulsion, the communications, and then ultimately the capabilities that allow you to perform science and prospect at an asteroid. So I want to leave with one other final point related to something that the government could start today, perhaps with no funds at all. And this is the opportunity for sponsored or rideshare access to solar orbit. This is being done in low Earth orbit, and actually was just recently done this week with a number of payloads on a variety of launch vehicles. But we see a situation where there are several missions that are launching to Mars or other destinations with excess capacity. The InSight Mars lander is an example that's launching with over a metric ton of excess capacity on the launch vehicle that it's currently on. The SLS demo flights that are coming up later this decade are an opportunity to get Earth escape trajectory and get demonstration or test payloads on that. And then even the Department of Defense has often had third stages, which after delivering a spacecraft to geostationary orbit, the third stages are disposed in solar orbit. So all this excess capacity could be of great benefit for an innovative and supportive environment for commercial activity. It helps to reduce the uncertainty associated with launch manifests and the schedules associated with them, the upfront costs with getting those manifests started. And then, of course, with a timetable on when these launches exist, there's certainly plenty of motivation to meet that schedule and to get the payload to that spacecraft. So this is something we'd love to see explored to allow more and more experimentation and innovation that can ride on investments that the government is already making. So Planetary Resources is ready to support NASA's objectives and goals with the Asteroid initiative, and we look forward to what these private and public partnerships might allow in the future. So Jen and Jason, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. All right, next up is Scott Zivchek from Prospect Dynamics.
Good morning, Scott Zivchek from Prospect Dynamics, and I'm going to take a few minutes here to talk about opportunities that NASA has to reduce the barriers to entry for small businesses as a means to increase participatory engagement. Unfortunately, when it comes to early-stage small businesses, we spend way too much time figuring out how to pay our employees rather than focusing on the technical challenges where we really are interested and really want to spend our time. There are two broad brush categories that NASA will have the opportunity to aid in. The first being a direct funding means, helping us reach the funding levels we need to move forward. The second, a more indirect means, and that is through leveraging NASA's visibility to aid us in gaining credibility, which we can then take out to help us find investment through other means. On the direct funding side, the intelligence agency built a model called In-Q-Tel that addresses a lot of the same challenges that exist for small businesses in the aerospace industry. And that is to use federal funding to fund a venture capital group to go out and find the technologies that are most significant, most relevant to that customer and aid them in getting through the starting gate, so to speak. With the barriers to entry in aerospace, the long timelines, and the significant capital investments required, this model is perhaps even more applicable and more valuable in this industry. Also, opportunities for relevant contract work. And now this would be specific to the Grand Challenge. Focusing SBIR topics, focusing other investment vehicles on the topics that are identified and needed for this Grand Challenge. Also looking at the paths to procurement and understanding really where some of the waste occurs. Just as an example, I've been looking at the NAIC solicitation that came out last week. The first step in that is a 3-page proposal. To submit that 3-page proposal, I need to understand and comply with about 130 pages of guidance and register on 4 different government websites for a 3-page proposal. So there are opportunities there to make it a little bit easier for a few more companies to get their ideas heard by NASA. And really this RFI was a great example of something simple to allow us to get information out. On the visibility side, there are ideas that are even easier. Something that would be worth its weight in gold to me is a letter of intent from NASA. This wouldn't have to be something that offers any real commitment, just an opportunity for us to submit an idea for review and, in the best of cases, have NASA provide back a letter stating that we've looked at this idea, the technology has merit, this guy can make it work. There might be a spot for it within the NASA architectures going forward. Retweets, even easier. NASA has a massive social media following. Providing and publicizing a hashtag that would allow us to request a retweet would be a very, very simple effort. And from that, NASA would simply need to review tweets tagged with this hashtag and make a decision as to which to bring forward. And then the big idea would be coordinated demonstrations. So talking about that specifically, what I have in mind for coordinated demonstrations focuses around demo day events. As each of us goes through the normal development life cycle, there are stages where we have natural demonstration points. And in many cases, those would be pretty uninteresting to anyone outside the organization. But over time, they get more interesting, more complex, and if we bring all of these ideas, all of these little development efforts that are going on across the industry, and bring them together, we can leverage the economies of scale, bring everybody into the same room, and build a lot of network effects out of that. It would start with technology road mapping, and not the high-level technology road mapping that is done and done very well at the strategic level, but the more tactical, detailed, technical road mapping within a specific area. So planetary defense, for example. What are the architectures that are being considered for a planetary defense architecture? And what is the trade space that branches back from those different architectures? Looking back through that trade space, what are the functionalities and capabilities that need to be demonstrated by certain technologies that need to be developed? Developing this lower level map would provide a go-to source for college students looking for ideas on relevant projects. It would provide an opportunity for businesses to go out and look and understand where they can best leverage their resources for the most bang for their buck. And it would provide NASA a scorecard. As we develop through this technology roadmap, NASA can see where and how we are developing and to which architectures, identify if there are gaps, potential areas that need to be incentivized. From this road mapping come the demo day events themselves. We bring a lot of people together into a room, into a convention center potentially, going through a number of demonstrations of the technologies that they are developing individually. Coordinating for scale, you bring a lot of people together that then enable NASA to show the momentum that is being built. It provides opportunities for people to see what else is going on in industry and potentially find complementary demonstrations. And it allows for really investors and large businesses to come and see what's going on as a potential shopping spree for acquisitions. And then the big piece is a headline event. So right now we have 4, 5, 6 events a year that aren't these small demonstrations. They're big demonstrations, newsworthy on their own. And if we coordinate these smaller demos, these consolidated demos, with the headline events, then we essentially have the opportunity to take turns within industry providing the coattails for everyone else. So how would Prospect Dynamics leverage this structure? One of our focuses would certainly be within that roadmap as a key point, and that is anchoring or attachment technology. As we progress through the development, we'd participate in demo days with different interesting and engaging attempts at showing how the technology is progressing. In time, we would be ready for a low Earth orbit attachment demonstration, which could serve as a headline marquee demo for a demo day. I'll talk more about this slide in context 350 this afternoon in the asteroid deflection demonstration session, but it is relevant here as well. What we would do for a demonstration of attachment technology is demonstrate in low Earth orbit rather than going to an asteroid. We would lift potentially a handful of CubeSats enabled with an attachment capability, and then use space debris as an asteroid analog, attach to the space debris object, characterize its motion, and then change its orbit. This proves out the attachment capability in a potentially bold and very visible manner. And it also highlights a number of applications that a single technology can be used for, from the planetary defense application that I'll talk about this afternoon to space debris mitigation if the altered orbit is to deorbit. Potential applications for on-orbit servicing as well. So that is how we would engage the process. But back to the overall concept in reducing barriers to entry, funding via investments or simplified contracting, and visibility being a means to indirect funding, allowing us to go out into the investor community with the credibility of NASA behind us. And then this overall idea of coordinated demonstrations to allow for leveraging the economies of scale, establishing the technology roadmap so we know where we're going together in a coordinated fashion, and then providing this opportunity of bringing so many people together in the same room. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Next up, we have David Gump from Deep Space Industries.
Tag team.
And Rick Tumlinson to help.
To help. Okay, ready?
Please.
I was going to start this with hello, Sharks, but David won't let me do that pitch. So I believe, first of all, there are 3 banners with a lot of great banners here. There should probably be 2 more, one that says harvest and another that says utilize, but they wouldn't have the meatball on them. They would just be here as part of the flow, because that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. We have to be able to create something that is a sustainable program that shows returns, both economic, educational, national, in terms of defense of the planet. And that kind of program is one that would be able to stand up to these activities a lot better. And it's something that it has to be sellable on all these different levels. And it has to, as somebody said in one of the earlier presentations, it has to be kept sold. And certain programs that are being put out and ideas that are being put out just don't fit that. So the overall broader partnerships that we can create, the ones that show both economic and cultural returns, are the ones that are going to be the ones that succeed in the long run. And if we don't pay attention, we will end up in the special rocket-shaped garbage can of Congress, because they need to see these things, and White Houses need to see these things, and they need to go beyond the time-based parochial interests of every administration that comes in redefines space. One administration, it's the moon. One says it's Mars. One says it's asteroids, been there to the moon, et cetera, et cetera. So there needs to be an overarching goal that goes beyond all of those, and the constituencies need to be broad enough to keep the activity going through those seismic shifts that occur. Now, NASA needs to do certain things. It has a mandate to do certain things, including data, space exploration operations, and planetary defense. And obviously, anybody on the inside or even close to the inside knows that that's the ultimate goal, is going to Mars. Whether NASA gets there first or Musk gets there first, we're going to Mars. And there are a lot of activities that are considered by some to be doglegs from that. I'm not interested in ripping a leg off a dog. I don't know where that analogy came from, but I wouldn't mind hitching extra dogs to the sled to take us into the unknown. And we believe that NEOs serve that by helping us do different things in space. Keep in mind, to get to any of these destinations, you have to cross the ocean of space. You have to go through what we call free space to get there. And on the way, it would be nice to be able to utilize what you can find there, those resources, to build your habitats, find your fuel, propellant, and in the meantime, we can be doing other activities such as helping the communication satellites extend their life, things like that. So there's a lot of possibilities. And if we can learn to live off the land, it's absolutely the key. We're working the transportation equation right now. We're getting a government. There are 3 legs to opening a frontier. Having a government that's not in your way, or at least not in your way, and probably helping, getting cheap transportation to and from the frontier, and learning to live off the land. And that's what we're all about. So I'm going to hand this over to David.
So of the 3 locations for space-based resources, 2 of them are at the bottom of gravity wells. And therefore, when you do resources on the moon, it primarily serves lunar activities. Same for Mars, it primarily serves Martian activities. But when you get your resources in free space, you serve all those destinations plus Earth orbit. And we tend to envision the Asteroid initiative as an enabler for lots of space activities rather than as a destination. And so we propose an initiative for commercial asteroid development that joins what NASA needs with what industry can get from asteroids, pooling the goals and technologies, and being able to develop a more robust space exploration system. And also in the process, as I'll talk about later, really enhancing planetary defense. So what we propose is the ICAD to be modeled primarily on COTS and the ILDD that Chris Lewicki talked about. The idea is that you go with a fixed price approach and a below cost approach to ensure that there's private investment. You get paid on milestones rather than a monthly cost plus invoice. NASA decides to buy what it needs, and then industry will fund additional capabilities to serve commercial markets. Just like with COTS, NASA specified we need this much tonnage and potentially these crew replacements done, and SpaceX and Orbital Sciences could come up with a vehicle that did that, plus what was necessary to make it an attractive commercial activity. And the benefit of taking this approach is that it's sustainable. Those activities, like Falcon 9, will continue to operate even if the space station contract eventually goes away. So, the agency specifies its need, provides tech dev, and purchases data, and the private sector both develops technologies and chooses which technologies need to be developed. It shapes the operation, and if there are multiple suppliers, NASA gets a competitive base to buy its needs from. This produces lower costs, as SpaceX showed. Not only was the total cost of getting it Falcon 9 created lower than possible under standard contracting, industry participated in paying that lower cost. As Rick mentioned, if you have a commercial asteroid initiative, you can cut off the dog leg, hand it to industry, and keep NASA focused on going to the Moon and Mars. And it also results in resources for frontier, living off the land and being able to stay in space once you get there. We like to emphasize that first, do no harm. NASA ought to focus on having scouting missions for industry, and that should be the first action under a commercial asteroid development initiative. And these small vehicles also, in the next phase, could do sample returns to reduce the great levels of uncertainty that exist with what anyone will find when you try to go to an asteroid for returning large quantities. And this, I think, might be one of the most important points for selling asteroid activity to Congress and the general public. Your planetary defense can be almost free. It becomes a profit center, learning how to inspect, intercept, and manage asteroids, because the asteroid industry needs to do that in its normal course of business. If you have a robust industry doing asteroid recovery activities, you'll have the hardware and the people already in space for faster response. You'll have lots of Bruce Willises already working in space. You won't have to have a crash program to suddenly develop them and launch them. So I think when you position asteroid activity politically, we really need to focus on you get planetary defense almost for free. The other benefits are much broader science. As on Earth, the resource industry, coal and oil and gas, has learned so much about the structure of the Earth's crust that is paid for by commercial activities. And if these things are done on an industry basis, we can do things that NASA cannot. Charlie's done a great thing to take over the exploitation rights of the solar sail project. With an industry-led project, though, the actual activities themselves can be tweaked. New things can be added to the baseline mission that support public engagement. So, in summary, we think that it ought to be a program that starts with buying scouting data, and in parallel, put out a BAA for industry ideas and how NASA and the private sector could actually carry out the asteroid redirection mission, and soon move into a phase where you seek competitive bids to be able to bring back asteroids in a manner that serves NASA's needs and also provides a continuing resource in Earth orbit that can be turned into useful products for expanding the frontier.
You'll notice nowhere in there do we talk about abandoned in place, surplus, or prizes. We are talking about analogies, the ILDD and the COTS approach of partnership. This is the big plan. This is the big goal. And yes, there are 2 asteroids rotating around that big red planet. But that's the big goal. That's where I think most of NASA and a lot of the citizens of the country want to go. We have our plans, and some of us are free spacers. We believe that if we can get together, we can do what we need to do, and our merchant marine can help support the opening. I won't say conquest of Mars, but I think it can be a joint partnership, and I think there's a lot to be said for all of us working together in these ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick and David. And next, we should have Eric Mumm from Honeybee Robotics joining us virtually. Is he on the line?
Yes, I'm here. I guess.
Excellent.
Okay. So I wanted to focus today on robotic technology development and maturation of the robotic systems and tasks that would be required for a bold mission like this, and talk about how some of the facilities and capabilities that Honeybee brings to the table, and how that dovetails well with some great facilities and capabilities, personnel at NASA, and how we can mutually work together to jointly develop not only a robotic system that can be successful, but also a ground test bed that we can use to validate these technologies. So the first thing I'm going to focus on are some of the relevant Honeybee technologies that fold into this narrative. So for those that don't know, Honeybee has been developing robotic systems, end effectors, sampling systems for the Mars program, lunar exploration, and even asteroid and comet sampling. So we've been on every landed mission since MER. MER, we provided a rock abrasion tool or a grinding tool that's featured in this slide. We provide 2 mechanisms for Mars Phoenix lander, and then we've got 2 systems on Curiosity right now. So we've got a pretty good history of working with NASA on developing robotic systems and performing great in situ science. So I've got kind of a generalized slide deck because we've got presentations across multiple topics, and this is the one that we had authorized to release. So I'm going to skip through this pretty quickly, and again, just highlight some of the relevant technologies that Honeybee brings to the table. So we've been developing robotic drills, planetary drills for sampling powders and taking cores for Mars, Moon, asteroids, and comets. We've got probably a collection of 10 or so prototype drills and sampling systems in our Pasadena, California facility. Those are systems that are available for continued technology development and demonstration, for not only performing some in situ science on an asteroid, but perhaps even placing anchors robotically for taking samples to perform in situ science and placing anchors in an asteroid, to minimize the EVA activity. Once in lunar orbit, there's a lot of utility for robotic systems that could offload from the human aspect of characterizing and exploring an asteroid. So we've got a great facility and a great set of prototype hardware, pretty high TRL hardware available to perform near-term demonstrations and feasibility studies. Pneumatic sampling techniques. So we've also developed some capturing mechanisms, docking mechanisms for satellite servicing, but these can be applied to this mission context as well, insofar as specifically this lasso system can be used to capture boulders or capture samples on an asteroid and pull it back to the spacecraft, whereby we can do some in situ science, all robotically. This could even be scaled up to capture the asteroid in its entirety. And so, those are a couple of the top-level, key technologies that we see as relevant in this mission concept or context. And with regard to participatory engagement, first, we maintain a nice facility out in Pasadena, California, where, as I alluded to earlier, we're developing various planetary drills and sampling technologies and the associated environmental test chambers required to validate some of these technologies in a relevant environment. And so we maintain, 3 chambers. You can see one very large chamber here on the left side of the screen that we use for some of our deep drilling demonstrations, again, in a relevant environment. Then the facility also has an extensive materials analog, or analog materials library. So we've got planetary simulants such as JSC1, FJS1, GRC1, and many targets or rocks that are good analogs to what we might encounter on the surface of an asteroid. So we maintain this capability within the honeybee umbrella, and I'm pleased to report that we have recently started engaging on the government side the Satellite Servicing Capabilities Office at Goddard Space Flight Center. And I know Bo spoke earlier, but they maintain a wonderful facility there at Goddard, whereby we can not only validate certain robotic technologies, such as grasping or capturing a boulder or capturing a large object, but also manipulating that large object. So maybe we place anchors in the large object, or we drill and sample. And so we see a nice culmination of capabilities here between Honeybee and our government counterpart, in this case Goddard Space Flight Center, and leveraging their vast expertise in robotic servicing and their amazing test beds, along with our expertise in robotic drills, robotic end effectors, and again some of the sampling techniques and the anchoring techniques and the geotechnical expertise that will be required when interacting with an asteroid. And so, this is we feel a fine example of a nice, private and government collaboration that should absolutely be exploited. To buy down risk and to demonstrate technology and to mature technologies that will be necessary to pull off a bold mission such as this. So. That, I think, about wraps it up. I'm at my 10-minute time limit, so that's all I have. I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Eric. Now ask that you would stay online as we now move into our question phase for this group. Let me throw it out to Joe. Do we have anything coming in? Yeah. You have a mic for Joe?
Thanks. So this one is actually to Chris, Planetary Resources. It's from Clinton Clark Online. The question is, if NASA focuses on prize money for funding of an asteroid study capture, how would that affect your business model or your competition, or your competitors, rather, business models?
All right, thanks for the question, Quentin. The availability of NASA's interest in prospecting missions and to provide a funding source for that type of stuff is a good augmentation to commercial opportunities that already exist. What it allows us to do is to engage with NASA in a specific need that they have and define requirements for that so that we can pursue that as an explicit line of business. Without something like that, we're kind of left wondering what NASA's objectives are and whether they may choose to meet them themselves, or if, in this example that I laid out, and it was laid out in other presentations this morning, can allow some well-defined collaboration with commercial capabilities that's coming online.
Thank you.
I think we should look at prizes in terms of the track record so far. If you contrast that with COTS, NASA paid SpaceX roughly 90% of the COTS contract before their first launch, and they now have a successful rocket. If you look at the Google Lunar X Prize, which pays initially zero prior to success, and the ILDD companion contract that NASA came up with, it was perhaps 10% prior to launch. None of the Google Lunar X Prize teams are in particularly good shape, and there's great doubt as to whether any of them will actually be able to get to the moon by the deadline. So I think in terms of asteroids, we ought to lean towards the COTS approach and lean away from the prize approach.
Hi, maybe this is for David and Rick or for Chris. I was wondering if you thought that partnering with NASA or help from NASA with issues that may be related to the Outer Space Treaty in the long run is important, or is that not important to your business case in the long run?
I can address that question. So with regards to the Outer Space Treaty and the peaceful uses of outer space, the issue is often frequently one of rights of extraction and mineral rights. And we, of course, have seen that used by many different nations, including the United States, in the collecting and returning of samples for scientific use. In partnering with NASA for obtaining those materials, perhaps eventually for science use, but as a result of a business transaction, this is an area where we can really clarify this area of the Outer Space Treaty and continue to set precedent in how it outlines and defines and allows this type of peaceful activity in space, even in the case of commercial interests.
I think we could use NASA's help in making sure that the space lawyer community is following practice rather than declaring what practice should be. Chris in the past has made the analogy to fishing in international waters. Those fish are the common heritage of all mankind, but once they're in the hold of your ship, they're obviously yours. You can bring them back to port. I'd like to try that approach for asteroid resources to start. I guess my greatest fear is a space lawyer tsunami cranking up with lots of bright ideas of how to structure everything before we've done anything.
I just want to weigh in on that as well. I think that several of those treaties, the early treaties, were written in terms of nation states as opposed to private companies. Nobody even thought that private companies would be engaging in space activities at that point, and we need to be cautious in the sense that if a nation state in the form of NASA is undertaking certain activities, that it doesn't trigger reactions that then trickle down and inhibit the private sector from doing what we want to do. There are people, and I shared a thing in London recently, and we had somebody pop up and say, well, we are in, I think it was Pakistan, and he said, it was an interesting refrain from the 60s and 70s, and he said basically, we deserve a piece of the wealth that you're going to create in space. I guess just because we're human beings on the planet with you. I think that can be handled more in a private sector realm by the fact that the obvious best way to distribute wealth on the planet that seems to be working most effectively is the free enterprise economic system. And many of the foes and the people that were in the quote-unquote non-aligned movement in the 60s and the 70s where these treaties were drawn up now find themselves, for example, China and the entrepreneurs in China on the other side of things. So there are different ways to look at it now than were originally intended by those treaties. And I think NASA can encourage a conversation, but make sure that it itself does not become the point of the argument by being a national entity engaging in these activities.
So I guess I applaud you guys in the effort to open this new industry. I can clearly see the parallels between what NASA's doing in terms of scouting and why scouting is important for you guys and why you would like to play a role in NASA's efforts to do that. But moving past that, opening a new mine is a very expensive thing, and opening new industry is very expensive. It requires a lot of investment, and I think we'd like to believe that there's potential private investment to open this new industry. My question really is, what can we do now to make investors more likely to help you and open that industry? What needs to happen before those investors will come on board? Do we need to prove mining technology? Do we need to find 1,000 rocks we can bring back? What is the key thing that needs to happen now to make that new industry start?
I think investors look primarily at, will you have a market for what you're doing? They have some faith that if there is a market, you'll find the technical solution to serve that market. So in terms of NASA, in the past, when NASA's been planning Mars missions, ISRU, in-space ISRU has played a relatively minor part because it's not yet proven. And so instead, there's envisioned, 10 giant launch vehicles to get one Mars mission done. If NASA could officially declare and acknowledge, we're not going to Mars unless we get resources in space, because there's no way we can afford 10 SLSs in 1 year to do a Mars mission, that provides one more marker for there is a customer, in addition to ComSats, in addition to Bigelow Aerospace, for large quantities of space resources. I think that would be the most helpful thing.
Do you want to
I'd
jump
like to
in,
comment on
Chris?
this as well. This is an excellent question in terms of what government spending ultimately can do in creating a foundation and an infrastructure which helps overall sustainable exploration of space and indefinite presence in space. All mining, of course, starts with prospecting, and whether that prospecting has been done by NASA scientific missions or if it has been done by commercial missions, that information helps connect the vast meteorite database we have on Earth with specific bodies out in the solar system. NASA increasing its efforts and doing as it has been done with the NEOWISE restart, the considering of repurposing Kepler for asteroid surveys, and the funding of new technology like NEOCAM and Space Act agreements with groups like B612 and the Sentinel to increase the rate of discovery. We've only found less than 1% of all these objects. But perhaps the most important thing that could be done with the way that we are laying out an infrastructure in our exploration of space is an infrastructure that leverages those resources that are already out in space, creating an architecture that uses fuel depots, that develops that technology, that creates a network between here and Mars and other destinations where those resources can be sourced from where it makes the most sense, maybe from the surface of the Earth, maybe from the Moon, maybe from the asteroids. And as we've seen in the past, it is some parts government, some parts private industry, and I think in this particular case, in developing the solar system economy, it'll be no different.
Just to weigh in on that with Chris, and I think as an industry of two companies now, we share a lot of the same opinions. The questions really get into, this is an organic dance that we can engage with in the government, and it is really making sure that we all know where we're supposed to put our feet so we don't step on each other in the dance. And in terms of an ARM, NASA developing, as we saw last night, through JPL and others, the ability to go out and grab things in bags and stuff like that, that's an appropriate government role as far as I could see. That's great, research development that helps lead the way. I won't get too far into the subject of whether I believe NASA should be the one going out to grab the asteroid, on the other hand, because pacing and pricing as set by the government is going to be different than that's going to be set by the private sector. However, if NASA can play the customer role and determine that in advance, it's going to be a customer, kind of emphasizing what both Chris and David said. If we look at, for example, during the era of the space shuttle, great vehicle that it was, amazing system that it was, the government was providing an operational industrial transportation role. With the space shuttle out of the picture and it now being clear that the government's going to buy its payloads and services from the commercial sector can again go out and build in that direction, and both parties win. The government in the end will have lower cost and more reliable multi-source transportation systems, and the private sector will have a market that it can go out to and leverage the investment that it gets. By the same token, if NASA downstream does declare, as David mentioned, that it is going to be buying resources, buying data, buying these things, and the lines are clear that that's going to be there, then we can go back to investors and say, look, there are customers in the form of government downstream. The government, in turn, can look at its budget estimates and say, you know what, we're going to be able to save X amount because these are going to be commercially provided services, as in the case of commercial transportation to and from orbit. So it really is a dance that goes on between both sectors if we can basically agree on the music, the tempo, and the pace, and where we step.
Anything, Joe? Okay. Any other questions? We're coming up at the top of the hour for our next break. All right, why don't we hold it there? We'll take another 10 minutes and be back with our third and last group of panelists, and then open it up to discussion. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you in 10.
Test audio check. Hi, is David, are you on?
Yes, I am. Am I okay on speaker?
If you think an asteroid is just a rocky metallic object that orbits the sun, think again. We have much more to learn about these big rocks. Asteroids are the leftover material that didn't quite form into planets. Ceres, the largest asteroid in our solar system, may actually have seasonal polar caps like Earth. And Vesta, the brightest, may have rocks more strongly magnetized than those on Mars. Join NASA as they look at asteroids to discover clues about the very beginning of our solar system.
We were the nation's first aeronautical research center.
Civil aviation started here. The Wright brothers walked the halls here.
We tested every military aircraft during World War II. We were there when Viking was developed, and we led the first landing on Mars. The evolution of the space shuttle, all that design work was done here.
We've been in the business a long time, and in fact have solved a lot of the problems that got us to this point.
At Langley, we are NASA's lead for the Environmentally Responsible Aviation Program. One of our challenges is being able to move far more people and products and services to a lot more places, and doing so more efficiently and more environmentally friendly. So to do that, we need more types of aircraft. This includes unmanned aircraft. It also includes looking at rotorcraft. We're also looking at supersonic aircraft and enabling supersonic flight over land safely and quietly. We're working with the FAA and DoD to look at not only air traffic management, but looking at new flight patterns, including unmanned aircraft coming into the airspace system and doing that safely.
All spacecraft are aircraft too. So that is the merger between the aerodynamics and the space. The whole Earth to orbit part is where both aero and space live. Right now it takes a lot of people and a lot of care and human touch in order to ensure that a particular spacecraft doesn't wind up landing on top of a boulder. So we're working on the vision and the ranging systems associated with autonomous landings.
We get a lot of challenges, and often when we go and try and address those challenges, structures and materials are part of the solution. So a good example is the Space Launch System, or SLS, NASA's next rocket that is for heavy lift that will replace a space shuttle. And the current technology won't do the mission without a complete change of the materials and structures that are typically used to get beyond low Earth orbit in terms of space access. Automated manufacturing, net shapes, there's a lot less scrap. All this has now come together as a result of a lot of work that was done at this center in the past that went into airplane applications that now directly moves into applications on the space side.
Orion is NASA's next big thing. It's the next capsule that's going to bring us to the edge of space. It's going to bring us to new frontiers beyond where we've been before. Here at NASA Langley, we're testing some possible impact scenarios that may occur when Orion comes back to Earth. We look at things like, will it survive the response? How many Gs will the astronaut see? Will the heat shield stay intact? Will it flip over? Because we can't test every single scenario, we rely on computers to fill in the gaps between our test data.
If you send people to Mars with the technology you've got now, when they get back, their body's full of cancer because of radiation. There's an lot of analysis that's done here at Langley to show that in a radiation sort of environment that they in fact are protecting the people or the instruments.
The hardest problem we have with sending people to Mars or robots to Mars is getting through that Mars atmosphere. It's not that it's thick and hard to get to. The problem with the Mars atmosphere is so thin. What Langley's doing, they're taking their knowledge of the Mars atmosphere, their knowledge of entry, descent, and landing capabilities, and they're building a scenario where we go through a multi-stage entry profile, where the best technology for that area of the Mars atmosphere is utilized to slow the vehicle down. A lot of the work we do in remote sensing can be applied in utilizing the capabilities at Mars in the atmosphere.
We're working very hard to try to understand the way our climates are changing and how we can characterize and identify our atmosphere. So some of the projects that we're using to be able to acquire this type of data are things like SAGE 3, Calypso, the Ceres instruments, and we're really excited for some of the missions such as Tempo and Clario, which can help fill the gaps in our understanding in terms of the way our atmosphere works and how we can make better decisions to protect our planet.
At Langley, we're a research center, and we're not about today, we're about tomorrow. How do we make tomorrow a better place to go?
I want to be here to make a difference.
The projects that we're doing can provide information that's valuable not only to the United States, but to the world.
It makes me proud to be a part of a family of researchers and engineers that are doing cutting-edge work all the way from concept to flight.
I think the attitude is we have a problem. It's a really intriguing problem, and we're going to solve it.
If you think an asteroid is just a rocky metallic object that orbits the sun, think again. We have much more to learn about these big rocks. Asteroids are the leftover material that didn't quite form into planets. Ceres, the largest asteroid in our solar system, may actually have seasonal polar caps like Earth. And Vesta, the brightest, may have rocks more strongly magnetized than those on Mars. Join NASA as they look at asteroids to discover clues about the very beginning of our solar system.
Hi, I'm Abraham Ben-Ruby, and you are watching NASA Television.
Everybody, here we are again at the Partnership and Participatory Engagement session of the Ideas Synthesis. Remind you to check out hashtag Asteroid Partners and join and follow the conversation online. We've had some really good conversations started already. We're about to move into our third and final section of this conversation before we then open it up into wide-ranging discussion. And so with that, let me turn it over to David Gustin, who's going to be representing ECAST, and the expert in citizen assessment of science and technology. David.
Good morning. My name is Dave Gustin, and I'm here in Tempe at Arizona State University, where I co-direct a research center called the Consortium for Science Policy and Outcomes, or CSPO. In my remarks, as was mentioned, I'm representing a group called ECAST, the Expert in Citizen Assessment of Science and Technology Network. ECAST is a distributed network that brings together university-based research centers like CSPO, informal science education centers like the Museum of Science Boston, citizen science programs like Science Cheerleader and SciStarter, and nonpartisan policy think tanks like the Woodrow Wilson International Center. Together, we engage citizens on decision-making related to science and technology policy. ECAST organizes deliberations among citizens to inform them about S&T policy, elicit their input, to reciprocally inform S&T policymakers. ECAST's methods are designed to enable participants to formulate and articulate their own questions so that policymakers may better understand and take into account public values around S&T. The grand challenge of the Asteroid Initiative addresses is find all asteroid threats to human populations and know what to do about them. Part of that challenge is also communication, to engage in broader conversation with those who are not thinking of or not working on or not caring about such an initiative. Despite the clear articulation of the grand challenge, there are values inherent in the question that are not completely owned by the current community of interest, including advancing human space exploration, expanding planetary defense, anticipating spillover effects of technologies, and charting the nation's future role in space. Thus, statements like that in the August 17th Washington Post rarely has the agency proposed an idea so controversial among lawmakers, so fraught with technical and scientific uncertainties, and so hard to explain to ordinary people, that suggests that a wide frame and a long-duration public engagement process is crucial. We think of this as taking into account what we call the life cycle of decision makers, in which we consider a variety of roles that citizens perform in, as well as a variety of decision makers and points of decision within society, not just the official, high-ranking, and technical ones. The grandest challenge is therefore to draw otherwise unengaged citizens into respectful, multi-directional conversations about the Asteroid Initiative and enable them to learn about and make recommendations based on their own questions and interests. Aspiring to this more active, engaged role for citizens, rather than just have them be passive understanders of science, is part of a broader approach that we call anticipatory governance, which involves, in addition to public engagement, open-ended approaches to foresight, for example, using scenarios rather than predictive modeling, and thinking about plausibility other than just risk, and integrating knowledge and approaches across disciplines, for example, by encouraging collaborations between natural scientists and engineers on one hand, with social scientists and humanists on the other. Taking these aspects ensemble can allow for the reflexive governance or management of a new science and technology in an informed and socially robust fashion. A plan of action for increased public understanding of and engagement with the Asteroid Initiative could include soliciting informed, structured feedback from citizens in multiple geographic regions, creating long-term feedback opportunities for the long-duration Asteroid Initiative, and providing an on-ramp for citizens to learn by doing through other related and ongoing activities. This shift from public understanding to public engagement has already been happening in the Science Museum and Science Center community, and it has involved concomitant shifts from public comment to citizen deliberation, facilitated not only by a change in attitude and a change in understanding, but of course also by a change in technologies. ECAST's experience in this matter includes coordinating the U.S. component of the recent worldwide views on biodiversity. We organized in 4 cities in the U.S. and coordinated through the Danish Board on Technology with 25 countries and 4,000 individuals around the world to provide input to the 11th Council of Parties of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity that took place in October 2012. Beyond this procedural role, ECAST partners extended the conversation through creating an online poll that was hosted by the Koshlands Museum in Washington, D.C., and mirrored on the Discovery Magazine's website. We created multi-sited and zoo projects and museum programs, including biodiversity galleries and a downloadable biodiversity quest, adaptable for use by informal science education institutions around the country. ECAST wants to encourage NASA to include intensive and extensive public engagement as part of the core planning process, the Asteroid Initiative, in order for the agency to best be able to proactively design a program that will deliver on public values. In ECAST's experience, multi-sited engagement could be done at a relatively reasonable cost, and it could be executed rapidly enough so as to inform the immediate mission planning that will follow the initial Asteroid mission formulation review. Such work would also complement and extend the initial principles of the 1958 National Aeronautics and Space Act, which directed NASA to share its knowledge to the widest extent practicable. In work, such work can be pursued irrespective of the OMB restrictions on public outreach activities because it is actually research intended to gather new and original ideas. Such citizen engagement studies build the capacity of citizens to interact in a more nuanced way that may also have significant value for NASA designers and engineers. NASA may very well perform a more technically capable mission after such public interactions. In the end, the agency will also be better oriented to share resulting knowledge with the public because it is pursuing knowledge that the public has already found to be worthwhile. And in the closing seconds, just let me say, somewhat more personally, just the other day I was, on the occasion of its 150th anniversary, reading the Gettysburg Address to my 7-year-old son, Sam. And Sam, in addition to being a budding historian, is a budding scientist and very much loves space and space science. And it seems to me that over its lifetime, NASA has done a remarkable job of being of the people and for the people, and ECAST would like to see it be, as best it can, be by the people as well. So thank you.
Thank you, David. I'll ask you if you wouldn't mind sticking on the line. We're going to have a question period and discussion afterwards, and I'm sure there'll be questions for you later on.
Okay, I'll try to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to Margaret Race from the SETI Institute, who will also be joining us virtually.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I am also continuing the discussion of the private part of the private part that we're focused on. So while the grand challenge, excuse me, I'm trying to get the, okay, how do I advance my slides?
Here you go.
Okay.
Here you go.
So we're in the Grand Challenge and thinking about asteroids as both opportunities and threats, and we are thinking about the elements that are related to success. Just as we heard from the previous speaker, there's lots more than just science and technology that would contribute to this success. And my talk is focusing on the parts that also involve the public in thinking about these missions, whether they are the resource missions, getting asteroids and redirecting them, or the deflection ones. I'm thinking about the risks to mission success, and it's important to identify and acknowledge that there are other impediments than just the technical and science ones, especially since we're starting to go down the road towards new activities beyond Earth orbit that have really unique features. And what I'm suggesting is a stepwise approach to research and technology development that also includes a systematic approach to looking at these other areas. So, next slide. So, when we think about what's involved in the challenge, everyone is quite aware of the need to think about science, whether it's observing and detecting, or characterizing and modeling and predicting where the asteroids may be. The technology, whether it's a redirection technology, a deflection technology, or perhaps even exploitation, capturing, and using. And we have to think about mission planning. How do we design these missions when we think about the new technologies, proof of concept, or whether we're talking about deflecting with gravity tractor or kinetic impactors or nuclear? We also have to think about reducing the risks to the mission. And then the final thing is these partnerships that we're talking about, the collaboration and the other. So on the right hand of my screen, if you will look at where it says the science and technical experts, generally what we know is that science and technical experts look at what to do and how to do it. We take an incremental approach to things. We do the research and technology development. And in this case, our success means either on the one hand we're going to save the world or develop new markets and develop new space. Next slide. Oops, sorry. That's how the scientists see it, but here's how others see the risks. The general public is saying, you want to do what? Not what are you going to do, but you want to do what? And they're asking questions about should we do it and what could go wrong. And when we think about a natural threat or a phenomenon like asteroids, there's a lot of partial or misinformation out there, in some cases even disbelief or conspiracy theories. And when we're talking about moving around asteroids, there's the potential that we take a natural hazard of some sort, and if we do something wrong, it's seen as turning it into a man-made problem. So what we're talking about is looking at the risk to the missions that are caused by responses and views and actions by the public and individuals. Because this is different than an individual making a decision to do something. This is the government or commercial groups making a decision, and the individual or the country or the societal group has little say in it. They're asking questions about who's responsible for making these decisions. Do you have the authority to do it? What are the geopolitics of it? Asking questions, as we heard earlier, is it legal? Is it in compliance with U.S. law in this case? Have you done an environmental impact statement? Are you being transparent about the information? What about lawsuits that might happen that would result in temporary restraining orders and holds on launches? They're asking questions about, is it right? Is it ethical? Are you playing God? And there's, in some cases, a distrust of technology. What if things go wrong? And so on and on you can come to these kind of questions that the public has. What we do know from research on risk, there's a repeated pattern and a process that we see of experts versus public views. This isn't the same as ignorance or fear. People, we have to recognize the multiple publics that are involved and think about a stepwise approach to addressing these. I'm coming at it from my experiences on the Mars sample return mission, where the risks have to do with bringing back potential life from outer space that might be biohazardous. And so we identified and addressed all of the potential mission impediments, legal, psychological, risk perception that people may have, education and outreach that may help it. And we took a systematic approach to exploring these new areas. And in the case of the features of asteroids as threats and resources, the public really is generally uninformed about it. They just don't know about it. And they do have unique concerns. And we're entering into new areas that have legal and policy questions that are beyond Earth orbit. if you look at the scientist and technology view of hazardous asteroids, for instance, and putting it in the context of the disaster and natural hazard literature, what we're talking about is a general threat. This general threat is looking at how do we detect them, how do we deflect them, and how do we make decisions about them. The notion is that once you can detect it, and then you can decide if it's a threatening one, you can go ahead and deflect it somehow, and then make decisions at the world level that everybody is happy about, and launch a mission and have an impact and success. And if you're not successful, then you can address questions of evacuation or other actions that might be appropriate. But another way to view it is a much more accurate one, which is that we're really talking about more than just a general threat. If you think about natural hazards, there's a general threat of a flood or a hurricane, but then a more specific one once that hurricane gets named as Hurricane Charles, and then an imminent threat to the people when it's coming tomorrow. And so we have to think about those levels of information as we go along, because it's far, far more complicated. And in the public context, what we see is that the notion of asteroids is not in the collective public perception. They don't know things like orbital dynamics, direct impacts, keyhole deflection, risk corridors, deflection choices. The time delays that we have between warnings, false alarms, having pseudo-experts get involved is really something that we need to think about. And there's, of course, geopolitics and decisions about what sizes of asteroids to deflect and whether nuclear might be involved. So all of these questions are amenable to the kind of work that has been done in the risk literature all along. For those involved in asteroid redeflection and resources, you're not out of the picture of some of these risk problems as well. People are asking questions about who's making decisions and why should you be able to use those things. As we heard earlier, there's questions about legal challenges and NEPA, ownership and claims to them, private property, outer space treaty issues, and so on. And if you look at the outer space treaty, for instance, all these years we've been in geostationary or a low Earth orbit, and those are where we've played out all the legal issues. When you look at the moon and other celestial bodies on the right hand of this chart, the only thing that has been involved has been issues of planetary protection and science missions. So all of those issues that we're talking about come up brand new, whether it's asteroid mining and redirecting, questions of ownership, claims, retrieval, and U.S. law or whoever the agency is. So whether we're looking at asteroid challenges as the opportunities of using the resources or the threats from deflection, there are a lot of other elements beyond the science and technology. So for the path forward, it's important to also think about those and include them in the stepwise approach. Include research drawing from the experience of the natural hazard literature. How do we link this in with the FEMA people and others who will be acting upon it? This isn't a matter of just turning over, saying, I found it, and now it's your turn. We have to think about how to address these potential mission impediments, especially for the asteroid impact, hazardous asteroid impact and deflection areas. And there's a long lead time in this, just as in any other research. So it's important to look ahead. We want to make sure that as we get to that point where we're ready to launch, that we have provided more than just one-way information to the public, that we really are addressing what they need to know in order to make our success be their success as well.
Thank you, Margaret. And I'd also like to invite you to stay on the line as we'll be moving into questions and discussion after we finish with our presentations, if possible.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up is Joe Lepore, representing Space Design Corporation.
All right, my name is Joe Lepore, and I'll be giving a talk on Space Design's Asteroid Initiative paper. Although I'm giving the talk This presentation was developed and written by Joseph M. Clay. Just want to give him his due. So I'd like to start off and begin with the background on how we started preparing a paper for this initiative. We looked at the forces on asteroids, and in summary, we looked at gravity, collisions, radiation pressure, solar wind, and then there's some others possible: magnetic mass loss and mass flow. We're going to be focusing on the radiation pressure and the solar wind pressure. And radiation pressure is comprised of two components. First is the direct incident, and the second is a Yarkovsky effect. And the Yarkovsky effect is a directional radiation pressure. It's caused by temperature variation from rotation. And it's a force that's acting on a rotating body, and it's caused by a difference in the direction of the absorption and the re-emission of radiation. So essentially, there's a lag between the incoming radiation and the temperature change of the body, and that causes that force. This is a very small force. So if we were to look at some simple relations for the radiation pressure and the solar wind pressure, the radiation pressure is a function of the solar flux and the speed of light. And if you were to reduce that down, you would find that the solar intensity will decrease with the inverse square of the distance from the sun. So that's R1 over R2 squared. And similarly, if you look at the solar wind pressure, if you were to assume constant velocity, it's going to be a function of the solar wind density, which is n, and the speed. And when you reduce that down, you also find that it's going to be a function of the inverse square of the distance from the sun, also R1 over R2 squared. So if we were to use those two relations and plot out what the pressure would be at various distances from the sun, this is what it would look like. We have two curves, one for the average radiation pressure, one for the average solar wind pressure. And you can see that the average radiation pressure starts out at about 80 newtons per square kilometer. So that's kilometer squared. So it's acting over a very large surface area. And we have listed several planet locations. Then also we have listed Eros, and that's the asteroid that we're going to be focusing on. And it's at a distance, it varies from a distance of about 1.1 AU to 1.43 AU. And we're looking at Eros because of its differences in exposed area. So as you rotate it, you can change what its exposed area is, and therefore you can change the amount of force that's being applied to it. So looking at the control of the radiation pressure and the solar wind pressure, both pressures can be controlled by changing the area exposed towards the sun if you could theoretically rotate it. And there's our test case Eros. And we're looking at a conservative minimum exposed area of 98.5 square kilometers, and a maximum area, or a liberal value, maximum of 374 kilometers squared. So also with the control of the radiation pressure, it has an added advantage that it can be controlled by changing the optical properties. So if you had a optical property on the surface that was black, that would be having a solar absorptance of 1.0. And if you were able to change that and move off to the right on this chart, you could go all the way to absorptivity of 0, which would be a specular mirrored surface. But by doing that, you would be able to effectively change the magnitude of the radiation pressure by a factor of 2. So that's a second way that we can control the force. So if we look at what the maximum forces are at the apogee and the perigee of Eros, what we look at here is the delta. Since we're able to, or we can theoretically rotate the Eros, we can change what its exposed area is. We could see maximum differences of 1361 newtons at the apogee and 2254 newtons at the perigee. And Newton is about a quarter of a pound, just to give you what kind of ballpark values we are looking at there. So now if we theoretically move the Earth into the path of Eros, so this is not the actual location, obviously, but just theoretically, if we did that, we're looking at what would the delta V on the far left there, the delta VB, have to be in order to change the path of Eros so that it would then miss the Earth. So you need to change it by at least the radius of the Earth, which is 6378 kilometers. So in just looking at some simple orbital mechanics, we calculated that the delta V would have to be about 0.24 meters per second. So if you were to use that 0.24 meters per second, and then use the max force that we showed on, or I showed on slide 7, and the mass of Eros, we can calculate how long it would take in order to achieve this, and it comes out to be about 37,400 Earth years. So obviously that doesn't look like a practical solution. And even if you were to substitute in, instead of the 1361, even if you were to use the maximum force at the perigee, we're still looking at tens of thousands of years. So now changing it up just a little bit, we're talking about the partnerships or markets for partnerships. And can markets be defined to support NASA's Asteroid initiative? So in a very, very general sense, technology drivers are needed to create technologies which would feed these hypothetical markets. And what we want to do is to determine what these markets are. So looking at kind of a simple view of NASA's current architecture, you have the SLS, which is used to bring Orion out to a lunar DRO, distant retrograde orbit. And you have SEPHEO, which can be used to capture a small asteroid, maybe 10 to 12 meters in size, and then use solar electric propulsion to push it back, where you could rendezvous with Orion. And then you could do a EVA to go off and examine and study it. So what we're looking for are markets to fill this type of architecture. Okay, almost done. And one of these would be that after this type of a mission is complete, then the asteroid is left there at the lunar DRO for further study. So in conclusion, the radiation forces and solar wind forces are significant but not capable of full-scale asteroid deflection. So other forces must be found to successfully deflect the asteroids. And market forces could be used to guide the NASA architecture, and perhaps a public-private partnership could help.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
All right. Thank you.
Next up, we have Tony Freeman joining us from the Jet Propulsion Lab. He will be joining us virtually.
Good morning. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. It just wasn't able to fit that in the schedule this time. But thank you for letting me talk about this topic. So what I'm here to do this morning is actually solve all the problems of the Asteroid Initiative by bundling together all of the ideas into a coherent program that then NASA can defend and move forward with. And I had help putting this together from Bob Cesarone and Joel Cecil, but also Steve Matusek. So programs are how NASA does business. We have many programs within NASA, within the human programs, the science programs, and Earth science in particular, Living with a Star, for example. And the Asteroid Initiative is very well suited to such a structure. So here's the list of programs that we pulled together that showed some of the amazing programs that NASA does. Some of them, like the Mars program, were voted the most successful program in the U.S. government. That's hard to imagine, but that a NASA program would be judged that way. But, you know, we do a pretty good job at this particular type of management. But there is no current overarching NASA program that's targeted specifically at small bodies, whether that's asteroids or other bodies like comets. The closest we get is the Near-Earth Object Observation Program, which is great, but, you know, it's more or less a standalone activity. So who would be the stakeholders for a program? Well, the science community, human spaceflight, who are targeting asteroids as a destination, the commercial world with space resources, and then, as we've seen in some of the other talks, planetary protection. It's pretty easy to map the initiative activities into a traditional program structure with advanced studies, technology development, robotic missions, ground-based observations, crewed operations on the manned side, commercialization, and education and public outreach. So what would the objectives be? Well, you could argue about this for days, and I'm sure if NASA set up a program structure, there would be arguments for days about exactly what the wording was, exactly what the objectives were. But it would be something like increasing the opportunities for human space exploration beyond Earth orbit, along the way to Mars, protecting the Earth from future asteroid impacts, and fostering a new commercial space business that uses the resources that these asteroids represent, with U.S. industry leading the way, and advancing key space technologies essential for the future. And if something like that could be agreed on, a lot of decisions become very easy afterwards. To look at the priorities, you could take a sieve like this one, which represents on the left-hand side all of the RFI inputs that bounded into ground-based observations and technologies and science and partnerships and different widgets and payloads, different ideas for missions. And you could bundle all of that together in a road mapping activity that used something like the JPL-A team to brainstorm, analyze, prioritize, and then synthesize options that were highest payoff for the stakeholder community. And then examine the space components of those in more detail using something like our Team X, which does a very good job of point designs. So lots of technologies. I'm not going to list all of them off, but obviously solar electric propulsion is on a lot of people's minds. Robotics and autonomous systems, the kind of sensors we need. There's an underlying base of technology required, and most programs have that, or they go to the Office of the Chief Technologist and say, here are our requirements defined to meet these program needs, and please implement a technology program that addresses that. Another advantage to having a program structure is you get out of the lottery game. If you look at the missions listed here that are NASA, either APL or Goddard or JPL, they're either, when they addressed an asteroid or a comet objective, it was done as a very secondary or tertiary science objective along the way to the main target, or it was done through the competition of the Discovery and New Horizons programs. And that's great, and that asteroid science has done pretty well over the years. But if you talk to the folks who work in Venus science in the planetary world, they haven't won the lottery ever on discovery and new frontiers. We haven't had a Venus mission since Magellan. And past success is no indicator of future performance, as I'm sure most of you are aware. So there's no guarantee that you'll win a discovery or a new frontiers competition with an asteroid mission in the next 20 years. So it could be a long time before we see another asteroid mission in the competed world. In a program structure, you get to define your requirements, have some work that's assigned, some work that's competed, and it's much easier to get that addressed. The items in red are all the international missions that we could identify that addressed some of the objectives of asteroids and other small bodies. And I have to say that NASA involvement in these is, at best, minimal. It's usually one scientist or two scientists on the science team who are, communicating with the rest of the community, but the missions don't get to address major objectives for a program, which would be beneficial. I have to say the ground-based community does a lot better job of this. They communicate quite well across the international community, and there are commercial involvement, as we've learned in this workshop, that seems to be working pretty well, but I think it would still be better bound up in a program structure. One objective that you might identify for a program is an outpost for a translunar asteroid, where you take the asteroid, and if people go to it and provide capability and leave it there in place for others to use, they are then entitled to a use of some of the resources that are available there, which include the material on the asteroid for either science use or for commercial use, or to demonstrate a new technology that could advance human exploration. Most programs have commercialization arms, and that's usually done through the commercial technology offices at the field centers or within NASA itself. And then programs have education and public outreach, where it's a coherent strategy. Again, I hate to bring it back to Mars, but the Mars rover outreach has been widely praised. It's part of the Mars program, and it's basically a planned activity that supports the missions and the science and the technology development all as one coherent package. And then finally, the missing piece in the initiative was science. Nothing wrong with that. NASA programs do have elements that are independent of science, but there's enough science going on in small bodies and asteroids in particular that you could bundle that in under the auspices of a program and steer some of those science opportunities towards advancing the overall objectives of an asteroid initiative. So I think that's the conclusion of my talk, is basically this would all be very nicely wrapped up in a bow in a program. It's what NASA knows how to do, and it also gives you a line item in the budget that you can defend to OMB and to Congress and to the National Academy and whoever else has an interest in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And if you two wouldn't mind sticking on the line, if possible, to be able to join in answering questions as they come up in the discussion.
Sure, I'd be happy to do so.
Very good. Thank you. And our last presenter, Jean-Claude Piedboeuf, representing the Canadian Space Agency, will close it out for us. Jean-Claude.
Okay. Thank you. And just to say, I'm replacing Christian Lange that prepared the slide, and he was participating to the last version of the workshop, but was not able to come this time. The first slide said 30 years of space exploration. I would say more likely it's 50 years of exploration in Canada. We started our space program 50 years ago, and it was interesting, the discussion on commercial activities I think space exploration is opening the way. It's a new frontier. And in Canada, when we started 50 years ago to sense things in space, it created now a space economy in Canada, like mainly in SATCOM, navigation and Earth observation. But this is really because the government started and said, okay, we want to explore space, that these industry exists today. And so when we talk about space exploration today, we are now building the economy of tomorrow by doing the exploration and going. We are in LEO, we go beyond Earth orbit. So this is an important aspect. But more recently, our exploration has been focusing on space robotics, vision system, and also contribution to science mission, especially for Mars and some asteroid mission. And space astronomy is also a strong focus for us. So the international context is important also. From a human exploration point of view, since a few years there is a discussion, and some of you have been participating and know about the global exploration strategy that was created or written, and it's interesting. It was started after the NASA announcement of the moon return and our U.S. announcement of the moon return, and the international community was asked to participate, and so we, at that point, the international community said, okay, moon is good, but Mars and Asteroid and Lagrange point are also good, and so NASA said, okay, we will include everything in this global exploration strategy. And one of the results was also the creation of the ISEC, the International Space Exploration Coordination Group, that again is focusing a lot on human exploration, but also including science, and more are looking how can we manage robotic and human exploration together, so each benefit from each other. And there was the Global Exploration Roadmap published in 2011, and a new one published this year, a revised version. So these are documents that are a kind of agreement between at least 10 space agencies, mainly from North America, North America, Europe, and Asia. But so it's significant. It's really showing a direction where we can go in terms of exploration, and recently also the benefit from space exploration has been published. It's clear from a Canadian point of view, and I think it's clear for others also, that space exploration needs to respond to the priority of the government, and if it's not doing that, asteroid, moon, or Mars or anything will not go forward. So the Global Exploration Roadmap is interesting in the sense that we say, okay, the long-term vision is that to have human on Mars. We know we already have robots on Mars since a few years now, and a recurrent series of missions. So from a robotic point of view, Mars is the program is underway already. But from a human point of view, this is the long-term view from many space agencies. And in the meantime, we need to develop some capabilities to go there. And the cislunar space is a good place, and asteroid also. It's a good way to learn to do that. So from a Canadian point of view, we have been focusing on few technology in terms of space exploration and in terms of the space program in general. And I will mention a few here, but I will cover that by saying we are focusing on optics and robotics. That's basically vision system and robotics, and starting a few new things. We recently, as part of the 2009 Economic Action Plan, government gave money to additional fund to the Canadian Space Agency, and we developed the next generation of the space arm, which is an advanced generation. And this one could be used for space servicing and an asteroid mission to retrieve a sample or to basically capture things. So this technology is especially the small arm that you can see here, which is like the Dexter, which is on the space station right now. It's not far to be ready to fly, and we have a new long arm that is telescopic boom now, so that can fit on smaller launcher vehicle as compared to the space shuttle where the Canadarm2 was launched. We have been working also in active vision system for quite some time. Canada started with a kind of optic vision system in the early day of the space shuttle and the space station, and realized that optic, it's not easy in space because of the lighting condition, and so switched really to the kind of laser-based camera. And since then, we have been using that for many activity. And one of them is when the shuttle needed an inspection system. NASA went to a company in Canada to procure that system, because we have been developing and it was already demonstrated for space utilization. On the Phoenix mission, a Mars mission, we provided again another LiDAR system to measure the atmosphere. There was some commercials like XSS-11. It was done a pure commercial cell also to use a LiDAR system to track a satellite. And we more recently we demonstrated a TRIDAR, which is a kind of laser system again to estimate the pose of a vehicle. And we are providing, and it's really pertinent here, is the laser system again for the mapping of an asteroid for the OSIRIS-REx mission, which is designed based on the XSS-11 and the Phoenix. So you can see there's some continuity, and there's a strong expertise in Canada to provide that type of system. And this is a bit of detail on the OSIRIS-REx laser altimeter. So obviously, this is a system to do a rendezvous with an asteroid, so it's pretty easy to make the link with an asteroid mission. The system could be improved and make better, and could be almost a direct contribution to such a mission. I heard that there is not much observation of near-Earth object. Recently, we launched a small satellite, a microsatellite, this size. And one of the goal of this satellite is to observe near-Earth objects. So, and I think, if I am right, it would be the first one to be dedicated to do such an activity. It's based on we have the MOST, which is a microsatellite for space astronomy, which is very successful. Was designed for 1 year and now has been for 10 years in space. So, and so this new satellite, NeoSat, is still going in not confirmation, but we are trying to find a term. But basically uploading the software, and we have not yet done the first capture the first image, but it should be done soon. So this one is could be also a contribution to know at least where you want to go. If you want to capture an asteroid, you still need to find where. And lastly, we have been working with I would say mainly NASA for the moon mission. Which was called Resolve and now called the Resource Prospector Mission, and developing the rover and the drill. And the drill, with some adaptation, obviously, could be used for an asteroid mission if you want to capture a core. This is a drilling that do a core sample. And we have also a mini core, which can be used just to do a very small core. So the drill can do, I think, 1 or 2 meter core now. And so that type of technology with some adaptation, because it's based on gravity and moon. Even if the gravity is slower, there is still some gravity. So in conclusion, this asteroid initiative is interesting. We will follow that closely and see if it's materialized in some real mission. We have the industry in Canada has the capacity to provide something, and there is some interest from a Canadian point of view to do so. So we are looking to that. We are studying that, and we think it's a good opportunity for Canada to position the Canadian industry, and obviously it's need the government. It has to be based on government priorities, and in Canada we are revising our space program, so we will follow that very closely to see if something can be contributed. Thanks.
Okay, that concludes our presentations for today. I'd like to, if possible, focus the questions for the next couple of minutes, 15 or so, from the last group of speakers, and then we can transition in more of the wide-ranging discussion of covering all the ideas that have been brought forth. So, Joe, do we have anything coming in?
Yeah. Actually, more of a comment than a question for David at Arizona State. This is from Linda Billingsley. She indicates that there's a need to engage everyone to participate in the deliberations and invite disruptors into like-minded groups. And I don't know if he wanted to expand on that any at all.
Thank you to Linda for that comment or question. And the invitation of disruptors into groups of engaged in public deliberation is a great idea for certain purposes. And there are times when you want those disruptions, when you want to have some divergent thinking, when you want to shake things up, and there are other purposes for which you need more convergent thinking. And, I think that should NASA or any other agency decide that it wants to engage in a broad-based public deliberation activity, it has to be very clear about the kind of public engagement it wants and whether that role will be to open things up a bit, broaden and disrupt some current thought, or whether it wants some more convergent kinds of recommendations. And you have the same kinds of issues that crop up with technical advisory committees as well, that operate under consensus or that operate under different kinds of rules and that get different direction from the agencies to which they're giving advice.
Thank you.
May I add in a comment here? This is Margaret Race.
Please.
Okay, the disruptors idea is a very good one because what we need to do is be mindful of the fact that this is not single discussions, single decisions that are being made. At the recent Planetary Defense Conference in Arizona, it was last April, there was a conference-wide simulation that involved everyone that participated, and they took on different roles, whether it was looking at the science, the technology, and some of the issues that came up with asteroid deflection were quite surprising. So some groups of people took on the role of being individual countries, for instance, making decisions within the context of the UN. And they actually voted against the asteroid deflection. There are questions of having a nuclear launch, for instance, that outer space treaty would have to be waived in some way, and we don't have a proof of concept. So there are risks at many, many levels, and the idea of bringing in disruptors, or at least acknowledging that these risks are real, is something important. And that's what I think both David and my focus is on, thinking ahead to the kinds of risks that can come up to the mission and the kind of success that we want to see. But those risks are coming in areas that we can't necessarily address with science and technology. So we have to think about how to go through the actual process of communicating not one way, but looking at what information we're going to give to experts in a FEMA situation, what information we give to the public, the mass media. There's just so many places.
This is Dave again. I would endorse that very much.
Thank you. Any questions in here in the room?
This is a question for the Yarkovsky effect on the Eros analysis. So that's a dozen kilometer-sized asteroid. How do the numbers play out with an irregularly shaped, like 100-meter-sized object?
I really don't have data for that. I really don't have any data on that right now. I would have to consult with Joe Clay on that.
It would be great to see an analysis like that.
Any other questions for this last panel? Let me throw one out. and this may get our discussion started as we seem ready to transition into the discussion that I'm hoping will facilitate some sense of what the findings out of this session ought to be, because ultimately this is our session to be shared together. We had a number of presenters that were selected based on their RFI responses, and now is an opportunity for us, based on that, to engage in conversation that will lead into the planning process. And so I'll focus it on this last panel, but we can expand it beyond as well, and that is how would you measure successful public engagement? It's easy for us to talk about that this is something that we want to do, and maybe particularly for David and Margaret to kick us off on that. And then a follow-up to that, can you give us some examples of success from your perspective so that we have an idea of something that we might be working towards? I know there was a little bit of that, David, in your presentation, but I'd like to expand on that some.
Okay, thank you. That's an incredibly critical and important question about measuring the success of public engagement. And I think the trick is to realize that just like with other forms of advice or technology assessment, that the critical measure is not necessarily that there's some silver bullet that comes from the public and has a discernible impact on exactly what's going on. If we use that criterion, then a whole lot of, for example, what the National Academies does would not be worthwhile doing. But I think our criteria of success need to rest in the area of capacity building and learning among both the specific and the broad array of individuals who are involved in the activities. So have the people who have been engaged learned not just substantively, but procedurally and, if you will, reflexively about their own role in the process. Have the elite actors, the folks, say, at NASA who are designing programs and projects, have they learned, maybe they have learned something substantively through the interaction, but more importantly, have they learned about process, and have they learned about how to approach their activities more reflexively with a greater degree of self-awareness and awareness of the public role that they're pursuing. And that learning opportunity begins to build a capacity, as I think I tried to suggest in the talk, of making the public and making the folks in the agency with whom the public is engaged more sophisticated and more nuanced about that conversation. Now, there could be real and concrete influence on the project itself, and that would be a goal as well, but I think the success really has to be measured by the increased capacity and the learning that goes on among the participants.
Thank you.
This is Margaret Race again. When I look at it in terms of the natural hazards community, there's a lot of research that's been done over the decades on how do we respond to natural disasters and threats of different sorts. And if you look at the history of something like fire, we know what fire is, the public knows what fire is, they respond to it, and there are examples of it all the time, so we're kind of, we have a collective memory of these things. Asteroids are very different than that, especially when we're talking about asteroid deflections for planetary defense. There is no collective memory. The public doesn't understand a lot of the terminology, and it's unclear even what we would do to tell FEMA-type agencies or regional emergency response folks what to do. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes information that has to go along with this. And we want to, again, think about not just one-way delivery of information to the public, but information that they can use. Thinking in terms of just the typhoon, for instance, that just happened in the Philippines, that's what we're up against. We're up against the potential threat of something like that. And what would we tell an individual, especially if we have a multiple-year warning of something like that? What is an evacuation in those situations? So these are things that are important to consider ahead of time. They don't change the fact that the science and technology is looking to deflect the asteroids, but on the ground, dealing with the risks and talking about the education, it's way more than just asteroid deflection. It's really risk and governance at the local area.
This is Tony Freeman. I think you raise a very good point. There's a good analogy to the 2004 tsunami.
Mm-hmm.
It had been a long time since we'd had a tsunami that was that deadly, and technologies, science, a lot have changed since the last time we had one of those things. And afterwards, a lot of really good work was done looking at the concept of operations. How do you get people alerted? How do you get people warned? What technologies do you use? But also, how do you educate them? And I think that's a very instructive area for us to look at for the asteroid program.
Speaking from California, I could tell you that we have sort of a 10-year window when it comes to earthquakes. If you don't have them every so often, people sort of get complacent. And then there's the issue also about the decisions. In Italy right now, there has been a legal case where some scientists who suggested that we wouldn't have another earthquake are actually found guilty and are facing prison time for liability in making a wrong decision because people went back to their homes and then the earthquake hit and people died. So this will play out, and certainly in terms of, I'll say, a Chelyabinsk situation, it could have been worse, but there's one where it came in from the blind. Nobody could even have predicted it in time. So we have to recognize that these things will happen, and that's part of the education that gets given to the public as well, the uncertainties.
Thank you. Jean-Claude.
Yeah, I will see public engagement from another point of view. We just had a quite successful astronaut in space with Chris Hadfield, and which basically was able to attract public attention. And it seems spontaneous, but it was really a preparation, more than 2 years of preparation to do that. So public engagement should not be done only on fear of something, but try really, and not just to learn or to educate the public. It's really the public is basically it's public money. So if the public is not supporting that, is not engaged, it's very difficult to sustain an activity. So, and we have been thinking about that, given the success of the Chris flight and how much the public like it. Could we repeat that for robotic mission? And probably yes, but we have to really think about the public engagement as a requirement. It's like a requirement that we need a sensor to do this thing, we need to capture this. We need some requirement that will be linked purely to the public engagement. And this has to be think very early when you design the mission, and not after the fact and say, okay, we do that for science or for protection, and then, oh, by the way, we need now to engage the public because this is part of our mandate. And so it's really something you have to be ready to spend money on engaging the public, and maybe adding an HD camera on your system, which has no scientific goal, which has no technical goal, but you will provide nice image, and you have also to engage the public in all the difficulty of your mission. Say, okay, now we have this, and we are designing this is difficult. If you don't give the information and you are not using the social media the way it has been used with Chris, then it's very difficult to engage the public.
Thank you.
The difference, again, with the engaging the public with the positive part of space, and even the idea of putting a camera on, is very good. And those things are very positive, even the Mars missions, and engaging the public in basic research and exploration. And so the asteroid deflection and resource use missions may be perceived differently there than the risk of a hazardous one. So there are two different kinds of communication that has to happen. And I agree that the public engagement of a positive sort is very important. but we also have to address the risks on the other side.
When I hear the term engagement, I actually think a little bit more strongly than in the context it's being used here. I think engagement is something that's deeper than simply being a click-through on a web link to a mission page. I think if you want to engage the public, it's going to involve things that actually actively get them to participate in. And I'm not sure what those things are, but I know that certainly in the world today, people engage by spending money. They speak with their pocketbooks. They speak in career choices. They do other things. And I'm just not sure that these passive observations of missions are sufficient engagement to really make this work out in the long term.
Before we jump into further thoughts, Jen reminded me we're going to be focusing on that very thing this afternoon in the crowdsourcing citizen science, as well as the next gen engagement tomorrow morning. So we will have an opportunity to kind of dig in there a little bit. But I saw a bunch of hands go up, and there's a mic up in the audience already.
You want me to wait then?
Please.
Well, I was just going to say, along those lines, there are, in fact, several ways you can engage the public that are not just the follow along, read up on the stuff. And in fact, we're engaging several different different companies where the crowd is used to develop parts of your system, whether that's simple videos or software or PR infographics. And so there's actual public ways that you can get people involved in the development and operations of your missions. And there's lots of those platforms out there now. So we work with them, and that's a little plug, but we can talk more about that this afternoon.
Regarding the... Go ahead.
This is Dave again, if I may.
Please.
On the strength of public engagement and the way that the, say, ECAST and the Science Museum and Science Center community has come to understand it is that the difference between the sort of public understanding, which would be the click-through activity, and public engagement is really about a two-way conversation, and one that goes deeper than simply technical understanding, but has to do with understanding the kinds of values that are brought to bear on the agenda and the framing of any particular initiative. And I think that, yes, a lot of those crowdsourcing techniques are able to engage people in the sense that they become active participants in the research, in the exploration, which is wonderful, but that tends only to happen for people who are otherwise paying attention. And that doesn't quite create opportunities for people who may not have attention, may not have the skills to participate in that way, and yet those other kinds of people still deserve and in many instances require the opportunity to help frame through their own values the kinds of things that are being done in their name.
I'll let Charlie address the public outreach crowd stuff because I know he's an expert at that. But coming from the defense side, which is I think where the speakers were addressing, there's a very interesting and subtle game that gets played often. For example, the U.S. military cannot advertise or lobby publicly as far as recruiting people, but they can run recruiting ads, which are super cool and make them look like superheroes and enroll the public and keep the public support for the military high. They can legally do that, but they can't advertise support your military. Now, in the quest to deal with the defensive aspects, the civil defense aspects of things, and in that activity, by engaging in that activity, the education that goes with it, hey, we may have a tsunami, here's what you do in terms of that tsunami, and getting people in that preparatory mode and educating them as a part of that, what you can actually do, and this is probably appropriate for a private sector guy more than a government sector person to talk about overtly, is what you're doing is very slowly and in a very careful way building constituency for support of larger activities in that realm on the planetary defense side. So by getting out there and talking to people about, I have seen people walk into congressional offices of legislators who had coastal districts and literally walk right up to the map and go, if a tsunami of this size hits here, this part of your state's gone. And that gets their attention in a very interesting way. And then you go in and talk to local officials. I handed the new mayor of Houston a copy of Rain and Iron and Ice and said, you might want to look at those gates you're putting in the Houston Harbor idea, things like that. So you can get them going in that way, and then that can translate into broader support. And I'll give that to Troy.
Thanks. To try and address Jason's question, as I often say, I think the answer is all of the above. Clearly, we need engagement and participation pre-launch. Clearly, we need engagement and analysis on threats. Clearly, we need to measure quick click-throughs and how many people sit in Times Square to watch the event. Engagement, as correctly was pointed out, is a spectrum of opportunities, whether it's, in our case, upload your song, or we have a Spanish poet from the 1700s whose family are contributing poetry to the Cosmic Archive. What my experience has been in now almost 20 years of providing public participation missions is I knew back in 1982 when I was a young man and we had a rocket on the launch pad at Matagorda Island, that when that rocket took off, that was a feeling that I'd never had before because it was my rocket. I was involved in the mission. The same is true for our Celestis missions. When when the families come and they know their loved one is fulfilling their dreams, that's a connectivity to what might otherwise be a very boring mission of a Korean satellite into space that carries on and interconnects over generations. For Sunjammer, we've created what we call mind files and bio files, where you can send yourself into deep space as part of the archive. We'll have an interactive mission control. We'll have the first private mission control that will permit people to come in and, after certain qualifications, actually steer the spacecraft. So there's the public's hungry to be involved in space and to be directly involved in space as opposed to watching, what's the phrase I heard, a few highly paid civil servants orbit the Earth. That's great work, but the public doesn't necessarily connect to that. When they're really involved, personally involved in some way in that mission, as I mentioned to the owner of the rocket that we flew on last year, you may think that's your rocket, but I've got 500 people here with families on board who know it's theirs. And that kind of connectivity does come from more than just a link following and reading about the information. It's active engagement throughout the mission. And people want it. And not only do they want it, they will pay for it, just as they pay for experiences today. And those funds can be used to do future missions or to enhance current missions. And the fact that we're beginning an era where that's okay, where it's no longer, this mission is mine, I'm the government, you can't do anything about it, with it, or touch it. We're past that, I think, now, and I think you'll see broad elements of engagement, such as the kinds of things that we're looking at here.
All right, and I just want to try to make a clarifying comment, because I think there's three games at play here. So there's engagement about the risks, which I think Margaret had a lot of interesting things to talk about. There's engagement of how do you have like a hit sensation when you're in the middle of it, the public is following along, and they're really enjoying it. And then there's this idea from David's ECAS presentation about sort of citizen policy. How do you figure out what the broadest goals should be? How do you figure out what the next Chris Hadfield robotic mission should be? Or how do you figure out exactly what the public thinks should be the right balance on risk in future asteroid missions, or exactly what they think the goal should be there? And I think what's so interesting is an intellectual framework from this anticipatory governance that was proposed by ECAS is that they've also got specific experience in proposing different activities on how to actually pulse the public and to try to have it's this nuanced interaction where you can't really get it through crowdsourcing. It's having experts who help present the information and the material in a way that's accessible to like non-standard actors. And I think it's a different framework that is worth taking away from this.
Can we pull up the discussion slides. I'd like to spark some. I've got some more questions that I've put on a slide to help us kind of zero in a little bit.
As you pull up the slides, this is Margaret Reese again. I think the last speaker speaking about the different ways of looking at communication and engagement is the real key. What the problem is, or the challenge is that we have to make sure we engage the public in appropriate ways across all the different things. It's not just, this is not PR, this is not just giving people science information. We really have to be very attentive to what it is that and what part of the mission or the objective we're informing people about.
And Zach, I would add a fourth category, actually, as we're talking about kind of a higher level schema that you started to lay out. The fourth category being the public or individuals meaningfully contributing to components of either the mission or the grand challenge. So the amateur astronomer that goes out and takes the observation, or the folks that are subscribed to SLU, which we'll hear about later this afternoon, that are actually using telescopes that are owned by a broader community and finding time on that telescope to do observations of their own, or crowdsourcing through existing data on things like Zooniverse, like Planetary Resources is going to be doing. So actually contributing to the meaningful work as well, not just participating in discussions or being informed.
One very serious consideration that needs to be taken it needs to be taken very seriously is that you guys are here representing the front end of a conceptual shift of getting the public involved. When you go back to your offices and it hits a wall of lawyers and it hits a wall of policy people, it begins to evaporate. One example is here at Johnson Space Center. They've built this great little building that is all about hackers and makers, and it's really cool, and it's got great furniture and dry erase boards, and there's a 3D printing machine, and it's like beanbag chairs. It's like ready for that, well under 30 crowd to roll in there and get creative. The problem is it's inside the gates, and you have to get badged. And that's a lawyer problem where the intention was right, but there is not an understanding that whole process of government badging, for example, is antithetical to the very blue jean culture that they are trying to get in there and innovate with. So when you carry back all these great ideas, there needs to be a depth of penetration back into the agency so that it doesn't end at the superficial front end of this event. So that the lawyers get a memo from their bosses saying, we need you to review, because they're not in this room with you guys getting this input. You're going to carry out some great ideas, and they're going to die on a lawyer's desk.
I'll take exception with that in the sense that I was late to this event yesterday because I was speaking to the OGC staff about this very mission. And Jen can probably speak much better than I because she's been partnered with the General Counsel's office for quite some time. And I would say that we've got a really great partnership with the attorneys that we're working with at our level. Mm-hmm. And I've done time in NASA. I left and came back. And I would say it's better than I've ever seen it. I hear examples that Bo Naz gives about a CRADA method that's working really well, and Charlie Chafer's talking about the Sunjammer, and so I think we might be perceived as kind of a front edge, but I don't feel that if that is actually what the perception is, that it's just a couple of people up here alone. There are a lot of people behind us.
I wasn't inferring that. I'm just saying that that's a constant thing. As the gentleman mentioned earlier about the NIAC proposal.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a good example.
That's a great example and see, that's why this is helpful. And that's why it's so fantastic to be here in conversation to say, I wouldn't have known that. Yeah. But we can go back and have that conversation and say, hey guys, because the intention is good,
we just don't always execute. And so this is where it's helpful to bring this stuff up.
Well, in that case, the A-team, go.
And so this is where I wanted to pivot into some discussion points, because we focused in on engagement. But really throwing it out, we've got not quite a half hour left. And we got an opportunity to put some findings in that will be factored into some planning. And so it was great to hear about the NIAC difficulties. Are there other areas that you're struggling with, that when we look at trying to build partnership opportunities going forward, what can we do to be better and more responsive? Are there walls that you've come up against beyond just NIAC? If you could design the system on your own, blank piece of paper.
So I'm going to maybe go back to Scott's presentation as a launch point. So one of the things he mentioned was a demo day.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to build something new and different, one of the things you face when you run into the government is they've been doing it their way for quite some time. And unless you have an opportunity to show them what you're doing in a kind of a free and open environment, you don't often get that audience. And I think something like a demo day is a good way for you to see that there's something else out there. There's a better way to do some things. Some of the traditional processes like SBIRs or STTRs, they just get buried in a corner somewhere. Maybe that's a way where you can get more of those ideas out in front and then allow them to show you what can be done kind of against the old guard.
This is Tony Freeman at JPL. NASA also have a tool, a vehicle they can use to partner with industry called the Cooperative Agreement Notice. It's actually pretty powerful. You get a lot of latitude. Usually industry has to bring some matching funds to the table, but it actually has been used in a wide variety of areas to get direct involvement and engagement.
David.
A simple thing that would help outsiders feel the shape of the elephant would be easily accessible org charts for offices. Some parts of NASA do publish org charts. Others, you just have to deduce who reports to who and how the structure is built.
Okay. Good.
And I'd suggest going beyond the org charts back to what are the actual technical challenges that are out there. A lot of times you need that seed. I think back 15 years to being in college and trying to figure out what to do as a master's project and not knowing what the real challenges were and where there would be value. If you can lay out that underlying framework, not just the high-level strategic goals, but examples of some of the pieces to start getting people thinking about where they could contribute and where their capabilities and resources best align.
So as a member of the robotics concept integration team, I was talking with David and Rick just a while ago, but what would really help us is if you could really identify that just the top 3 areas that we can take back to headquarters or GERST or whatever and say, this suggestion, these top 3 suggestions would help better enable our mutual relationships. So if you can give me some food there that can be taken back, and maybe we can do something about this.
Yeah. Do we have a sense of what the top 3 looks like?
I can add some of the things that I heard during the conversation to try to add some more fodder. One was, of course, the visibility aspects that you brought up. So trying to make sure that NASA can also play the role of helping potential partners that are seeking mutual interest get some visibility from their partnership as well. in doing so with NASA. I think some of the others that we heard were NASA can just simply state things. David, one of the things that you mentioned was NASA stating the importance of in-space resources, just stating the importance, and that can serve as a kind of advanced market commitment of sorts of the future of space exploration that could help drive some of the companies that are seeking to drive that activity in space. And so there's some things that are communication activities, right? Making statements, taking positions, helping promote was one kind of set of activities that we saw. But then also I heard many comments on the vehicles that we use, right, to partner. I think it was also you maybe that brought up the 300 pages of requirements that you had to read through to submit a 3-page document back, right? So the RFI in many ways was a first step to engagement. How do we continue that? But the structural kind of elements of how you partner, CRADA or cooperative agreement, as Tony said, or FAR or COTS or PRIZE, and there's many mechanisms that could be used differently, but making sure to look at which mechanism might further the mutual benefit that everybody wants the most. So it's 2 that I heard, might be others.
So dovetail off yours a little bit. I think some clarity around NASA's own business model. Where do you want to be the builder-doer versus the buyer versus the collaborator at different points of the mission? And then allowing industry to push back and say, yeah, you said you wanted to be the doer of that, but that is so simple. Why would you spend big government dollars to do that? Or that's the most lucrative. Why would you spend big government dollars? That's where we can be motivated to go do that. So some clarity around that. And I think that gets back to David's point as well. If you make that statement that we're going to be a buyer of the service, there are going to be 20 companies pop up and figure out how to deliver it. And if you say I'm going to be a doer of the service, well, I'm not going to go build that because I don't have the pockets to necessarily compete unless it's extremely lucrative.
Pound home on that because I've been pounding on that one for about 20 years, and that's the idea that at that top level, if the government can sit down and go, okay, settlement, science, and safety, those are the 3 main areas we're looking at when we're dealing with NEOs, or safety in terms of planetary defense, science in terms of expanding the scientific base of humanity or the U.S., and settlement is we're blazing a path for you. So you lock those in at the very top level, and then bring together some people from the different communities, and this is a part of it. And maybe some more expert people in a different setting, the ones who are really hands-on, directly involved, and then maybe on the more crowd, grassroots thing, more people involved, and sit down and go, okay, in each of these areas, once you have that top-level decision, your other decisions under that cascade out of it. It becomes clear. If the goal is settlement, then you have to have an economy. If you're going to have an economy, then the government needs to look at every activity it's doing as to, does this enable the development of an economy, which is what he was saying, or does it inhibit? Are these operational tasks? Can these be handed off? Or are these ones that catalyze? Should we be an anchor tenant, or should we announce we're going to build the building even though we know somebody else can build that building, and we could just be an anchor tenant and enable them getting financing to build that building? There are a lot of models actually outside of space where government does that very effectively. The FBI or IRS rolls into a city and says, we're going to have this floor of the new building. We are now an anchor tenant. They can get financing, then build the whole building. Those kinds of relationships. And then, by putting it in terms of we're not doing it for you, you are doing it with us. And then that trickles all the way down to the crowdsourcing and getting the kids involved in anything. Because it's not NASA astronauts performing, climbing around the popcorn package, pulling out gravel on an asteroid or something. It is an entire series of activities that involve the entire broad U.S. public pushing forward on these different areas that are going to lead to these 3 things that they are a part of and they will reap the rewards from, and it's their face at the end. It's their kid that's going to be going out there. That kind of thing makes it personal.
Rick said something earlier about giving the book A Rain of Fire and Ice to the new Houston mayor. And this is a comment about the messaging that's contained within the idea that NASA states something. After the last workshop meeting that Sunday, 60 Minutes had a great spot on the Chelyabinsk explosion and stuff. And I was thinking, oh, this is fantastic. What a great way to represent the risk to the public. But at the end of it, the NASA scientists who were there really kind of, I'm not saying they understated it. I think they were very accurate. But I think there was the amount of drama that could have been contained in their statement missing. They really said, I left the program saying, oh, well, they said there's really nothing to worry about. And I think that's not exactly the messaging that is most convenient to the situation.
This gathering in the RFI has been pointed to as a step. How has this felt? Is this valuable? Has this opportunity to gather and discuss been a valuable process? How would you change it? If we're recognizing that we're trying to get ideas to plan and move forward, how would you design? What would that look like?
Sorry. Yeah, you guys have been awesome. I mean, I think it's great that you're doing this. And again, if you can get the depths and penetrate deep into that headquarters building in D.C., that's great. Or more importantly, maybe the center director's offices. That would be even better. But find an auditorium that doesn't have theater-style seating. Okay? Because it implies that you're talking to us. Might be part of it, or have breakouts that go off and work on focused areas and bring it back and that kind of thing. But I definitely want to say I've spoken to a lot of people, people that weren't here the day after the original one got canceled and weren't blah, 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 officially anyway or whatever, but people who interacted, and they feel really good about what's happening. And I think this is a good approach. The rest of NASA could learn from you guys on this, I think. So.
Any of the questions that are thrown up on the board, how would you like to participate with NASA? Are there technologies that we can focus on? We've got 15 minutes. I don't want to belabor it. If we feel like we played this out to however far we're going to get, we can break early and people can grab lunch. But we do have 15 minutes left if there is discussion that needs to be continued.
Yeah, I might frame one of these questions in getting towards the statement that you made about the top 3 things to go back and take to Gerst from your perspective. Would be what would you say would be the top opportunities in the near-term window to enable and to partner with the commercial sector and the public in general on this initiative to better position it for success in both areas? So what are the opportunities? Thinking maybe about the nearer-term stuff, because that's the stuff that we need to get moving on, right? But what might be those nearer-term opportunities and tactics?
This will be more self-serving than it intended to be, but I think it's around identify, because it's the most tangible set of technologies we have today, whether they're ground-based or space-based, visible or IR. Those are things that a broad community of people understand very well, how to make sense of that data and do something with it. And it goes beyond just the professionals. I think this is where you can get into crowdsourcing. You can mobilize semi-pros and true amateurs to do some portions of the mission. Right? There's a lot that we don't know about asteroids in general, not just where they are, but even ones we know where they are, we don't know a lot about them. So there's a lot of work that could be done there in a very quick turnaround, where you could reach out and start mobilizing a lot of excess capacity to get back to engagement. I think you want to know if you engage somebody, it's how do they use their excess capital, whether it's their time, their resources, their mind. I think that can be done in a hurry.
And I completely agree with Clinton that Identify is a good early opportunity, but I think so that we don't lose sight of the next step, in parallel, we really need to start focusing on the technologies that do need to be developed so that there's an understanding out there of what we should be working on, and we can articulate what it is that we need to be partnering on, what steps we need to take, so that once we are even in a better position than we've already gotten to from an Identify standpoint, we know how we can actually get out there and interact with an asteroid.
I got the impression that Sunjammer, and I know that B612, these are two semi-commercial or certainly fundraising endeavors that enlist the public by offering some participation. I know you can give money to these projects and in some way have your name associated with the project. If to somehow attach the NASA meatball to that notion of public participation seems like something that could be explored.
I'll go one more. I'm looking at the pictures behind your head thinking somebody at NASA probably cooked those up. Maybe you have an image contest and ask someone else what they think Identify looks like. Does it look like a $30 million facility with a 3-meter optic? Does it look like, you know, an ISS EVA suit for Explorer? Even conceptually, right, that sort of sets a tone. Do you go in somewhere else and get someone to set the tone of the idea behind all of these things and see if that sparks a different direction in terms of doing some of the work?
Great.
Basically, it's the bottom line is get on with it. Operating at government salary pace and aerospace salary pace, especially for entrepreneurial companies like ours, you guys are going to have some sort of industry day next spring. That's 1,000,000 years away for us. Okay, we're burning investor money now, and as is the other company. So do things now. They don't have to be the major things, but things that begin to break the catch-22 of can we work with these people? Are they real? How do we prove it? And start doing those things. On the crowdsourcing side of things, go and the broader public involvement, get started now with something. Don't wait for the perfect plan, the mega giga plan that somehow fits into your 2015 roadmap activities or something like that. Start now with something that is, as they say on the internet, a minimum viable product, and gets you rolling and indicates that this is real and not a kabuki dance or a road show, which I don't think you guys are engaged in. But the proof is always going to be in the action starting, both on the public side and the company side like ours.
Great. Anything else burning? Please.
I'm actually carrying the microphone, but I wanted to make a comment about some of the discussions that's been made on crowdsourcing. There's been some discussion about maybe the informed public that can contribute because they've got the resources or are in groups where they're being able to contribute, and maybe the other spectrum of the general public that might just be informed. In this area of crowdsourcing or being able to actually provide some sort of funding towards a project or towards an idea, even if it's not fully developed yet, allows people to really feel like, from a public standpoint, that they have ownership. I really liked the idea of the mind files that go up because people feel part of the mission.
Be prepared for, expect, and grow from failures along the road. Not all partnerships are going to work. Not all crowdsourcing is going to get there. I looked at one a few weeks back that was a lunar mission that raised $17,000. Well, man, if they can do it, I need several of those things. But it's really important, when a private guy gal puts her money at risk and succeeds, she gets wealthy. When she fails, it's tough times. When a government gal puts the agency at risk, which is how any of these partnerships are viewed. They're viewed, oh my God, what can go wrong? What will Congress say when this thing fails? And when the agency succeeds, often as not, people go, well, you didn't need that much money. We're going to cut your budget. But the person gets a plaque on the wall or something. It doesn't get personally rich. But when the agency fails, there's a whole city called Washington that I lived in for 20 years that just jumps all over it. And look at this Solyndra example in space kind of thing. So I think that going into partnerships where you invite goofballs like Rick and me to participate, you got to qualify us. There's no question about that. You can't just enter into a partnership with everybody, but you have to not expect to bat 1,000 along the way, and you have to structure them so that people don't get harmed when that happens. But it can't send the agency back to, okay, now we're back to Apollo the way it should be, because that ain't going to happen anymore. So be aware that not all of these great crowdsourced missions will ever fly. Not every partnership that NASA enters into will succeed, but you don't need it. Part of it, when it's much lower cost and much more diversity of organizations trying to get there, they don't all have to succeed. You have to have a good batting average, and you can't waste money. But at the same time, some of the best things I've ever built and done have come because I really goofed up previously, and I can't do that anymore. I have to change. So that's a difficult culture at NASA to embrace. I applaud. I've seen night and day strides, and I've been doing. Jason knows I bought a Minuteman missile from NASA in 1982. I'm still the first and only U.S. citizen ever to buy a Minuteman missile. That was a really unique partnership that Neil Hosenball, who was the general counsel, figured out, well, I can't really sell you a Minuteman, Charlie, but I can sell you the rights to use it. And if you don't bring it back in the same condition that you borrowed it from, you have to pay full acquisition value. So that there are innovative, there have always been innovative people. What I see now is more of an innovative culture, and that's because the finger's out of the dike, the gene, pick whatever silly analogy you want. There's just too much commercial stuff going on to ever bottle it back up and go back to the days of Apollo. That's not a viable model. But the new model is not going to be pure, light at the end of the tunnel. There are going to be some hiccups along the way, and you should use those as learning events, and not seek out to fail, but not punish failure by saying, well, that model doesn't work. We're never going to do that again.
Yeah, great. Any other thoughts? Good thought. All right, folks. I think this has proven to be a really, really successful session this morning. We had 55 respondents provide ideas that got down selected to those that were presented here today. Huge thanks to those that all of you that took time to put in a proposal. And for those that were selected to take the time to then prepare a presentation and come share with us, and then all of you that joined us to participate in this conversation, I really do believe that it is the first of many steps forward, and I feel like we have a lot of good material to pull in to the findings that we'll share in the plenary, and really appreciate all your time and energy to get us to where we are at this point. So with that, let us close maybe 3 minutes early. And this does not end the conversation. There's hallways
and internet and relationships that I hope we've started that will continue this as we move forward. So with that, I thank everybody, and we will adjourn our session.
And please remember to attend the crowdsourcing and citizen science session this afternoon. You can see us again, but in flipped roles. And on Friday morning, you can see us again flipped, for next generation engagement. And in those two panels, we'll really be talking about meaningfully engaging individuals in the work of the grand challenge element of the initiative. So we please encourage you to come to those and be part of those discussions, especially since, has been stated by some of the folks in the audience, that's where we're going to be likely doing a lot of the initial work right out the gate to get started on this activity. So we would really love your feedback since those things are quicker in the hopper. So thank you very much.
Thank you.